From 1998 to 2003, a civil war in the Democratic Republic of Congo killed more than 5 million people, making it the deadliest conflict since World War II. The war is over, but millions more have died from starvation, disease, and gang violence. The House Foreign Affairs Africa Subcommittee held a hearing on Congo today. The witnesses include State Department officials, as well as actor Ben Affleck and Cindy McCain, the wife of the senator.
The subcommittee will come to order, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us on this very important hearing on the Democratic Republic of Congo at this critical juncture in its history. As one might conclude from the significant media interest evident in the room, we do have a special guest witness joining us today to spotlight attention on the Democratic Republic of Congo. I am grateful to Ben Affleck for agreeing to be here to share his perspectives and that of the Eastern Congo Initiative that he founded. He is to be highly commended for contributing his time, finances, and fame to bring the world's attention to the needs of the people who have suffered far too long and in a great deal of obscurity. I would also like to recognize Ms. Cindy McCain, who is also with us today. Ms. McCain is a founding member of and investor in the Eastern Congo Initiative and shares Mr. Affleck's dedication to ending the suffering in this region. She has dedicated her time and energy to a number of other very worthwhile projects. For example, she serves on the boards of directors of several non-profit philanthropies, including Operation Smile, which provides reconstructive surgery to children with facial deformities, and the landmine removal group, the Halo Trust. Mr. Affleck and his organization are making a major contribution in focusing political will on resolving the crises in the DRC and bringing constructive recommendations to the table. But just as importantly, he is setting an example for all of us as to the need to direct whatever resources and influence we may have to help those who are less fortunate and without a voice to help themselves. And his presence, perspective, and example for that, the subcommittee is most appreciative. I'm also grateful for our distinguished witnesses who are here as well. We look forward to examining the administration's current strategy for and involvement in the DRC with Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of African Affairs, Ambassador Donald Yamamoto, and USAID's Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Bureau for Africa, Raju Jandalahu. We will hear about the Catholic Relief Service's experience in the DRC as well, particularly in addressing the abhorrent and widespread practice of sexual violence as a weapon of war from their sexual and gender-based violence advisor, Francesca Vigo-Walsh. And finally, the subcommittee again welcomes John Pendergrass of the Enough Project to learn from his extraordinary expertise in the region, particularly on the issues of conflict minerals. Mr. Pendergrass reminds us boldly in his testimony that the conflict minerals provision, Section 1501, requires the administration to develop a strategy for addressing linkages between the trade in conflict minerals, armed groups, and human rights abusers in Eastern Congo by January 17th. This strategy has not yet been submitted. However, I hope it's coming soon, and that will be an obvious question for Ambassador Yamamoto. An individual from the DRC was invited to testify at this hearing, but unfortunately arrangements could not be made in time. But I can assure you the DRC will be an ongoing focus of our subcommittee, and I'm certain that we will hear from DRC citizens and indigenous activists at a future hearing. My friends, I've had the privilege of traveling to the DRC back in 2008, and I still have vivid memories of both the suffering and the courage of the Congolese people. A highlight of my visit was meeting Dr. Joe and Lynn Lucy, founders of Heal Africa Hospital in Goma. I met with several women who had been subjected to severe sexual violence, including rape, and spoke to many women who are in the process of healing and recovery. The courage, the resilience, and the resolve of these victims to overcome all that had affected them was truly astonishing. And the meticulous care and compassion of the hospital staff was absolutely remarkable. I am pleased to note that USAID has supported fistula prevention and treatment in the DRC since 2005, including 1,000 repairs at the Heal Africa and Panzi hospitals in fiscal year 2010. In 2005, I would note, I sponsored legislation that included authorization of assistance to establish centers for the treatment of obstetric fistula in developing countries. This legislation passed the House, but did not get through the Senate for unrelated reasons. However, Mr. Ken Hill, then USAID Assistant Administrator for Global Health, agreed to significantly bolster USAID's funding for fistula programming. The women of the DRC, together with thousands of other women around the world, have benefited as a result. As the prime sponsor of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, I am especially interested, and I hope the administration witnesses will address this, about the DRC's Tier 3 ranking as an egregious violator when it comes to human trafficking. Has it improved since the Trafficking in Persons report was submitted? And what has and can be done to reintegrate former child soldiers? The Democratic Republic of the Congo has an abundance, as we all know, of valuable natural resources, water, arable land, and people, making the DRC a potential leader in terms of prosperity and development on the continent. But like too many of its neighbors, it faces enormous challenges. The people of the DRC have endured ongoing violence and bloodshed for decades and often has not been paid attention to. And again, why I think Ben Affleck and the appearance today finally brings such much needed, often neglected attention to the DRC. The country has been the scene of one of the longest and deadliest man-made humanitarian crises in the world, characterized by 2 major civil wars involving 7 neighboring countries, multiple cross-border conflicts, fighting by and among foreign proxies, militia groups, and rebel movements, illicit activities including the illegal exploitation of mineral resources, an absence of governance, human rights atrocities directed against civilians by all parties, including the predatory Congolese military and an unreliable UN peacekeeping force, which I'm told is getting better. Millions of people in the DRC have died from wars and war-related malnutrition and disease since 1998, and nearly 2 million are displaced. The sufferings of war have been compounded by horrific human rights abuses committed against innocent women and children. The country as a whole faces enormous challenges. The DRC is one of the 5 poorest countries in the world, with 80% of its people living on just $2 a day. Corruption is rampant, as evidenced by the DRC's ranking 164 out of 178 countries surveyed by Transparency International's 2010 Corruption Perceptions Index. The country is 10th among the world's 22 high-burden tuberculosis countries, and malaria accounts for 35% of the deaths of children under the age of 5. Life expectancy is only about 51 years. An estimated 8.2 million, or 1 out of every 8 people in the DRC, are orphans and vulnerable children. Clearly, this country and the surrounding region are in desperate need of peace and the coordinated efforts of the world community to prevent a complete loss of its people's hope for the future. The upcoming presidential and parliamentary elections in November render this a particularly critical time to focus our attention on the U.S. strategy for addressing the many issues confronting the Congolese people and government. And given that today is International Women's Day, this is a particularly appropriate occasion to recognize the courageous women of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In addition to the hardships that unduly impact women in situations of conflict and underdevelopment, the women of the DRC have had to endure years of brutal victimization of rape and other forms of sexual violence used as a weapon of war. An estimated 200,000 women have been raped there since 1998. Their physical and psychological suffering has been compounded by the ongoing absence of measures to prevent future attacks, the impunity with which the perpetrators continue in their communities or the military, and the stigma wrongly placed on the victims by Congolese society. A recent report by the UN panel detailed interviews held with victims of sexual violence in the DRC. While the plight of all the victims is heart-wrenching, the interviews with those in the Kivus who are still experiencing ongoing armed conflict are worth emphasizing. These women are desperately in need of the most basic necessities: medical care, housing, and a means of supporting themselves and their children. But when asked what they would like to have done to restore their lives and regain their dignity, virtually everyone responded that peace and security is their first and most immediate need. They pleaded with the panel to convey this message to the world, because without peace and security, anything else that they might acquire could be lost again at any time. A primary goal of this hearing is to answer these women's plea. I'd like to now turn to my good friend and colleague, Mr. Payne, for any opening comments he might have.
Thank you very much, and let me congratulate you, Mr. Smith, on assuming the chairmanship of this committee, and certainly look forward to our continue working together on these issues of mutual interest and concern that we've had over the years. Certainly want to also welcome the new Democratic members to the committee. He's not here right now, but Mr. Carnahan is the former chair of the subcommittee that in the last Congress had jurisdiction over human rights, which, as you know, our committee has expanded that, so he will certainly bring in experience there, and is a dedicated advocate for the rights and the needs of refugees and displaced persons, women, as passionate about assisting child soldiers, as well as empowering women as peace builders. Mr. Carnahan's commitment to Africa runs in his veins. His grandfather, A.S.J. Carnahan, became the first United States ambassador to the newly independent Sierra Leone in 1961. And so he has a very strong interest and has had a number of conversations with me about Africa. We also are pleased to be joined by Ms. Karen Bass. Is not only new to the committee, but she's new to Congress. However, this former Speaker of the California Assembly, the first African-American woman to hold a Speaker's gavel in the history of this nation. And so we are very pleased and honored to have her as a member of our committee, and so she's no stranger to legislating. I welcome the opportunity to help Ms. Bass turn her experience and interest in health, women's rights, and economic empowerment into policies that can benefit the enterprising women of Africa and their children. I am excited to have this small but powerful team with us here on our committee. I want to also recognize Representative McDermott, author of the Bipartisan Conflict Minerals Act, which is an important tool for accomplishing long-term stability and economic growth. And he's also the author of the AGOA Act. We called him the father, but he's gotten older, so we call him the grandfather now of the AGOA Act. So it's good to have my classmate, Mr. McDermott, here today. It is fitting, Mr. Chairman, that we begin our subcommittee business for the 112th Congress by highlighting a foreign policy challenge that resonates in the hearts and minds of so many members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans. The humanitarian crisis in eastern Congo has captured the attention of thousands of Americans from all walks of life. Our commitment to solving this problem exemplifies that Americans care deeply about these issues and really want to see a resolution. As a former teacher, I know that we must understand the problem before we begin to tackle it. We must understand the history of the Congo and the Great Lakes region, perhaps the richest, most fertile area on the continent. Many here today will talk about the ravaged militias that continue to terrorize the eastern part of the country. I want you to understand that the ravaging began in the late 1880s when King Leopold of Belgium savagely and gruesomely sought out to strip the Congo of its vast natural resources, which continued to be a source of conflict in that country back then and continues on today. Leopold's nightmare reign in the Congo left 5 to 8 million Congolese dead, and even more maimed. The atrocities that we witness today are the vestiges of Leopold's bloody enterprise. For decades, this region's wealth washed ashore in ships at ports in Antwerp, and Congo's loss became Leopold and Belgium's gain. As destructive as their rape of the Congo was on the country's natural resources, the impact on its people is immeasurable and still plays out today. Yet its impact is still misunderstood and underestimated. As we contextualize the gruesome violence in Congo, we know that this gruesome history is no excuse for the ugly reign of terror that armed groups such as the FDLR and the LRA have perpetrated against the people of the Congo. There's no excuse for impunity. The humanitarian crisis in eastern Congo has captured the attention of thousands of Americans across this country. Rape and sexual violence are used as a weapon of war in numbers that are simply unimaginable. In addition to the Lord's Resistance Army led by Joseph Kony, continues to wreak havoc on parts of the DRC. The DRC continues to face insurgency from armed major groups, and major humanitarian crisis continues, especially in eastern Congo, fueled by a resource grab. The integration of many former domestic rebels from the CNDP into the Congolese army has presented serious challenges with professionalizing the security sector. The current reconfiguration of the Congolese army units in the Kivus in an apparent effort to eventually draw down the UN's Amani Leo peacekeeping operations have the potential to leave civilians in some areas of the East at the mercy of the FDLR and other non-state armed groups. All of this is compounded by the troubling political developments and turmoil in Kinshasa and the lack of overall preparedness for the upcoming elections scheduled for November. The American people and indeed the world are not willing to watch idly by as women and children in DRC are victimized time after time, time and again, year after year. They have advocated over the last few years, or we have advocated bipartisan legislation such as conflict minerals bill and the LRA legislation. Americans from red, blue, and purple districts come together for the people of the Congo. That's a united effort. The people of the Congo deserve to see firsthand the resounding impact that our relatively small foreign aid investment can have on the world's most vulnerable populations. Indeed, while the human needs are enormous, the required economic commitment is minuscule when compared to the $100 billion yearly committed in Afghanistan and trillions of dollars we've spent in Iraq during our course of time there. And the potential impact is monumental. The United States must leverage the goodwill that the American people have for the people of eastern Congo by devastating and having a coherent and a focused policy towards the Congo. That's what I hope we can have as a conclusion of these hearings as we move forward. I must close by saying it is fitting, as Mr. Smith mentioned, that this hearing is on the 100th anniversary of the International Women's Day. Ending sexual violence as a weapon remains one of the greatest challenges to the protection of women's human rights. While the survivors can be as young as a girl or her grandmother, we must do all we can to end this scourge. The White House, the State Department, Capitol Hill, and the American people all understand the importance of reducing violence in eastern Congo. This means regulating the trade. This means regulating the trade in conflict minerals that act as an economic fuel to the conflict, creating the political will to reform the Congolese National Army from predators or making them from predator to protector, and tackling impunity for war criminals and illegal actors that continue to enable those most responsible for mass atrocities. The United States, in its role on the UN Security Council, recently demonstrated strong leadership on the passage of UN Resolution 1960, which requires the Council and member states to honor commitments to combat sexual violence and conflict, investigate abuses, and hold perpetrators to account. I encourage the United States to continue to lead on this issue by developing a strategy to tackle the root causes of sexual violence and other human rights crimes in Eastern Congo. The United States is the largest contributor to the United Nations mission in Congo, or MONUSCO, and the first country to pass a law monitoring publicly traded companies using minerals mined in the Congo or its neighbors in an effort to reduce the direct or indirect financing of illegal groups. The Department of Defense and State are engaged in initiatives to build capacity through military professionalization and justice training. We must also ensure that we continue strong programs and policies that give women in the Congo back their dignity. We all want to see a day when the women of Eastern Congo are able to feed their families, earn a decent living, protect and defend their communities, and sit at the peace-building table with the men. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate this meeting and look forward to our very distinguished panel of experts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. The Chair recognizes the Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee, Jeff Fortenberry.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, for convening this very important hearing, and I think it is important to note that it is especially poignant that today is International Women's Day, as we hold the hearing for the more than 200,000 women in the Democratic Republic of the Congo who have been heinously victimized in recent years. Last year alone, nearly 15,000 new cases of sexual violence were reported in the country, thousands of which involve children. And those numbers don't reflect the many women who must remain silent, but this hearing today breaks that silence. The intense human tragedy in the Democratic Republic of the Congo continues to weigh heavily upon all of us. While numerous signs of democratic progress have been seen in recent years, civil strife has reached an unfathomable high in some areas, particularly in the eastern part of the country. The social emergency is seen quite clearly in a recent study that revealed rape has increased 17-fold within the country. In the last Congress, we made two significant strides toward mitigating two sources of the conflict by passing the Lord's Resistance Army Disarmament and Northern Uganda Recovery Act of 2009, as well as the conflict minerals provisions in another law. We also directed millions of dollars in humanitarian assistance to the victims of sexual and gender-based violence, but aid can hardly keep pace with the staggering numbers of new rape victims each year. Sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is the worst in the world in both its pernicious scope and unrelenting brutality. The scourge of rape is especially prevalent in the Kivu provinces, where we saw last year a particularly monstrous series of systematic rapes by rebel fighters. As we later learned, these vicious attacks were committed less than 20 miles from a UN peacekeeping base, which only learned of the months-long attack after a week after their end. Since that inexcusable lapse, the UN, with the Congolese government and other non-governmental organizations, successfully brought to trial and convicted 9 FARDC soldiers, including their commanding officers, for crimes of mass rape last month. I join with the United States government in commending this conviction. The rule of law did prevail. But there are many, many more perpetrators who not only elude justice, but flout the most basic notions of humanity through their brutal acts of extreme violence toward the daughters of the Congo. But our human rights concerns lie not only with the scourge of gender and sexual-based violence in the DRC, child conscription by rebel forces, but purportedly by the Congolese military itself, continues. UNICEF released a new report this past Friday warning that despite the reintegration of as many as 5,000 former child soldiers in the DRC, forcible child recruitment is an ongoing problem. As we give attention to the victimized women and girls of the DRC, we must also give special consideration to the plight of girl soldiers, who are often victims of grotesque sexual slavery and violence as well. These girls, stripped of innocence and dignity, face heartbreaking stigma and challenges as they seek to reintegrate into their families and their community. So today, Mr. Chairman, I do look forward to hearing the U.S. State Department and USAID's efforts to help bring peace to this tragedy-worn country, as well as the unique on-the-ground perspectives from the Eastern Congo Initiative, Catholic Relief Services, and the Enough Project. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you for your important work, and I look forward to our hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. I now yield to Ms. Bass.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Payne. Since this is our first subcommittee meeting, I wanted to start by expressing my sincere enthusiasm about serving on this committee on Africa, global health, and human rights. It's also an honor to serve with Chairman Smith. I know that you are committed to improving lives around the world and are particularly passionate about preventing sex trafficking. I look forward to learning about your legislation and working with you. And to Ranking Member Payne, Representative Payne is well known in my district in Los Angeles, and I represent a section of my district as Little Ethiopia, and I have a number of African residents who live in the district, and Representative Payne is well known there as he is throughout the country for his effective leadership and ability to move policy that makes a significant difference around the world. I'd like to thank our witnesses for your dedication and to establishing peace and prosperity in the DRC. Your work truly keeps people alive and contributes to global security. The State Department and the USAID have played an important role in generating progress towards stability in the DRC, but the United States must continue to increase our strategic leadership in the Congo. Secretary Clinton's visit in 2009 was a great start, but the severity of the violence and instability requires heightened and focused U.S. engagement. In fact, U.S. leadership is needed now more than ever as we approach the November elections, and we expect President Kabila to lift the ban on conflict minerals in the East as early as March 10th. I want to join my colleagues in acknowledging International Women's Day. It's been referenced several times, the consequences of the rape of women and girls, but one of those consequences is that women make up a significant majority of HIV infections in the country with little access to basic health services. USAID has led the effort to provide health care and services to Congolese women and children. UNICEF coordinates effective programs for women and girls that reduce infant, child, and maternal mortality rates and improve access to clean water and sanitation and increase primary school enrollment, particularly for girls who are often denied equal access. In the face of grave atrocities in the DRC, we must ensure ongoing investment in these programs. I look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses today to learn more about how we can best support the Congolese people in addressing these hardships and ultimately transform their potential into prosperity. Thank you very much.
Anybody else on the subcommittee would like to be heard? You know, Mr. McDermott is with us, and I know it is a little bit of a breach of rules, but I would like to yield to him if he'd like to make some opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 1987-88, I lived in Kinshasa and was a regional medical officer for the State Department and saw the beginning of the AIDS epidemic as well as the conflict that ultimately led to Mobutu Sese Seko leaving and followed by Kabila and all of what has followed. I have many friends out there. The Lucys are people I've known. A friend of mine from Los Angeles that I went to college with has been one of the big supporters of that organization, and I've been there several times. And I really came to listen today, so thank you.
Mr. McDermott, thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce our two distinguished witnesses, leaders in the field and who have done much. And Ambassador Yamamoto is no stranger to this committee, having been before us many times in the past. He has served since 2009, though, as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau for African Affairs of the U.S. Department of State. His prior assignments included serving as U.S. Ambassador to Ethiopia from November of 2006 to July of 2009, and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs from 2003 to 2006. And we're also joined by Ms. John Dalayu, who has served as USAID's Deputy Assistant Administrator for Africa since October of 2010. In this capacity, she oversees the offices of Sudan programs and East African Affairs, and has a great deal of experience at the Department, and I would, without objection, include both of your full bios in the record. Ambassador Yamamoto.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's indeed a great honor to appear here before the committee, and I wish to express my congratulations to you, Mr. Chairman, on your appointment, and also to the great work that your predecessor, Congressman Payne, and also before this distinguished members of the committee. President Obama, Secretary Clinton, and this administration have demonstrated a firm commitment to the challenges in this region, the violence, the human rights abuse, the suffering of the people of the Congo, exploitation of minerals and resources are unacceptable, and none of us should tolerate it, and we will not accept it. The work raised by the good works by your main witnesses, Mr. Ben Affleck, and by others, by Ms. Cindy McCain, really are testament to what the power of what individuals can do in the Great Lakes area. And I also notice that my good friend John Prendergast and the other NGO groups who are here, whose work has helped a great deal in moving this process along. Let me tell you, Mr. Chairman, that the United States continues to play a very significant role to make a difference in the lives of the people in the DRC and wherever there is suffering and tragedy. In the 10 years following 2003, we led an international effort through our tripartite plus peace process to address the causes of violence and to end the tragedies that promote violence. I was greatly honored to help lead the process for nearly 4 years, making some 24 trips to the region. Secretary Clinton traveled to the DRC in 2009, as have other senior administrative officials in the last 2 years. Our overall arching goals and objectives in the DRC to resolve it lies in governance and security. You need to have a government that is accountable to the people. You need a security which is reliable and dependable and not part of the problem. The U.S. is focused first and foremost on the complex security challenges facing the DRC. The shocking incidences of mass rape and other human rights abuses continue in these areas are symptoms of several factors that fuel or enable violence, each of which requires its own responses. One key factor is the continued presence of violent armed groups. Among the most notorious are the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, or the FDLR, and the Lord's Resistance Army, or the LRA, retain a violent and committed corps fully capable of carrying out brutal attacks on civilians. The U.S. government has provided significant diplomatic and programmatic support to disarm, demobilize these groups. The fighting capacity of many of these groups have been significantly reduced in the last 2 years, but much more slowly than we wished it to happen. The forces of the former National Congress for the Defense of the People, or the CNDP, remain only partly integrated into the Congolese army, serving under the effective command of known human rights abusers and retaining in their ranks significant numbers of children soldiers. The DRC security forces often compound the threat to civilians. Developing and reforming these forces is a massive undertaking that will require years of persistent support. Our assistance in this effort is aimed at both short-term and long-term progress and includes the training of Leahy-vetted Congolese battalion, capacity building assistance for the DRC's military justice institutions, training to officers on the principles of leadership, civil-military relations, human rights, and command responsibility. The illicit trade in minerals and other natural resources also encourages violence, and effective Congolese response and regional and international responses by governments and industries will be key to resolving these problems. The United States is focused on helping develop civilian regulatory capacity, helping to end the role of illegal armed groups, criminal networks within the security forces, and promoting corporate due diligence and supporting the development of regional and national mechanisms to certify and trace the minerals trade. We appreciate the support of the Congress that has provided these efforts, and we're consulting with the Security and Exchange Commission, as you have directed, Mr. Chairman, as they develop regulations to promote rigorous corporate due diligence. Underlying every element of the international community's response to the DRC's security challenges is MONUSCO, the UN peacekeeping operation in the DRC. Under the leadership of the former U.S. Ambassador Roger Meese, MONUSCO has taken welcome steps to improve its effectiveness in civilian protection. We are also encouraged by the improved relations between MONUSCO and the DRC government. A second theme is governance. The national elections scheduled for November of this year are an essential step in determining Congo's democratic future. We are watching closely to encourage elections that are well and transparently administered and that are conducted in an environment conducive to free political expression. Our other preoccupation is the area of governance, is human rights. The lack of adequate state capacity, the indiscipline of existing state forces continue to fuel existing abuses against civilians. We are undertaking substantial programmatic efforts, expanding on the Secretary's 2009 pledge of $17 million in assistance to respond to and prevent sexual and gender-based violence. We are also supportive of modest but encouraging recent developments in a few key areas, including the arrest and conviction of a handful of high-profile alleged abusers in the DRC government's proposal to develop specialized judicial chambers to prosecute those who committed atrocities. The general situation, however, remains one of impunity, and many more positive developments will be required to reverse this trend. The third theme is economic recovery, which is essential in providing alternatives to enlistment in armed groups and laying the foundation for development. We are encouraging the DRC government to take the necessary steps to improve the investment climate and to enhance transparency in the mining sector. With the lifting of the ban on mining in the DRC's eastern provinces expected on March 10th, we encourage all stakeholders to work to ensure that minerals leaving the DRC can be traced to their origin and that abusive armed forces are cut out of the trade. Finally, it is worth emphasizing that the renewed cooperation among the DRC and its neighbors is the cornerstone of this region's future progress. The cooperation, while vastly improved over the last 2 years, will need to deepen further in the face of new developments, such as the emergence of an independent Southern Sudan. Helping empower the Congolese people and their government to address the challenges they face will take time and persistence. The U.S. government intends to remain a strong partner over the long term. The DRC has focused attention of the United States government and the activities that are directed under the Assistant Secretary of African Affairs, Johnny Carson, and coordinated with our ambassadors in the field, the interagency, and our NGO community partners, and also the donor community. Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you today, and I will submit a longer version for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your testimony. I'd like to yield to our second distinguished witness.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Payne, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss with you about the foreign assistance activities of USAID in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is particularly relevant in recognition of the International Women's Day today. My name is Raja Jindal. I'm the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Africa Bureau since October of 2010. And prior to joining the government, I had an opportunity to work on the continent for 17 years, including the Congo, in the months after the global accords that were signed in 2003. As my testimony adds to the themes that Ambassador Yamamoto has raised about peace and security, progress toward governance, economic development, health, and well-being of the population. As part of the Presidential Policy Directive on Development, which was issued recently, and in support of our policies toward foreign policy toward the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Administrator Shaw's efforts to look at our review and look at our approaches to our assistance on the continent, we really have taken an effort to look at Congo as a very complex challenge in terms of like Sudan and in Somalia. So we really have a strategy review that's going on to look at our complex operations on the continent. DRC is yet another example of a place where diplomacy and development are critical to assisting Congolese find solution to their current challenges, lay the groundwork for meeting the aspirations of its population at the end of the day, and build a nation that contributes to regional stability. And in that effort, we work with both regional organizations, international partners, and national institutions, both in the short term and in the long term. U.S. recognizes enormous challenges, financial resources required to improve the conditions, and in that regard, the U.S. government continues to be the largest donor in DRC, providing $306 million in bilateral assistance in fiscal year 2010, plus support to the UN peacekeeping operations MONUSCO, multilateral institutions like the UNDP, and UN agencies. U.S. foreign assistance is coordinated among agencies through country assistance strategy that outlines our plans for U.S. Congolese cooperation in addressing the immediate needs as well as long-term development needs. In addition, we're one of 19 bilateral and multilateral donors participating in the Common Assistance Framework established in 2007 with government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This gives us the opportunity as the international community to really leverage our assets and how we bring pressure and establish a dialogue with the Congolese on development objectives in the Congo. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to now review the major development challenges in DRC and current summary of USAID activities to address them. A written testimony has been submitted. The DRC, and in particular in the East, continues to experience instability, violent conflict, and widespread population displacement. A key area of concern remains the Lord's Resistance Army. USAID promotes stability through community reconciliation, infrastructure, livelihoods recovery, and ex-combatant reintegration. Our offices of foreign disaster assistance and Food for Peace have ongoing commitments to provide emergency humanitarian and food relief where LRA are active. We're currently working as a regional strategy in support of LRA issues as part of our Northern Uganda strategy as well, to find the linkages in CAR, Northern Uganda, and Congo. With regards to conflict minerals, our activities are in support of the 2010 Dodd-Frank legislation, which includes reporting requirements for mineral origins. In DRC, the illegal mineral trades fuels armed groups and undermines legitimate economic activity. To reduce the security and governance problems regarding trade in conflict minerals that result in the violence, USAID seeks to improve enforcement of the DRC mining code through our regulatory support, rehabilitation of roads, and build capacity for better monitoring and transparency, including certification. Addressing human rights abuses and sexual and gender-based violence is a high priority for USAID. USAID provides access to support services for rape, abuse, and survivors and their families, including medical care, counseling, and legal aid, where women are afraid to report to local authorities, and how we deal with the local justice to support their efforts. More importantly, we also support women survivors and livelihoods. Many times they're not participating in the community recovery activities that are taking place. In addition to addressing the immediate needs of the survivors, USAID has supported drafting critical legislation and subsequent prosecution related to sexual violence, and this continues to be an ongoing challenge given the weakness in the justice institutions and sectors, and we are trying to work with both at the national level and the community justice mechanisms at the moment. In turning to democracy and governance, USAID focuses on capacity building among legislators, civil society organizations, and media. We also work to improve the independence of the judicial sectors and bring legal services to remote populations, such as mobile courts where they're possible. In preparation of the DRC's presidential and legislative elections planned for this fall, USAID continues to build on our strengths in citizen outreach and mobilization. More than 8.2 million voters across the DRC's 11 provinces are expected to be reached by civic education programs, and we're attracting and leveraging other resources to enhance the participation of the population in a transparent manner. In terms of social services, health sector is our largest priority at the moment, given the violence and in terms of preventing a lot of the health-related epidemics we find in the Congo. USAID seeks to strengthen primary health care. In addition to our continued support to HIV and AIDS, we also support malaria programs. As Chairman Smith mentioned, we support 2 important fistula hospitals, which have treated over 1,000 women who've received repair surgeries in 2010, and we hope to expand the outreach of those services. We've also brought together 12 providers of these services to ensure there's a network that they learn and exchange ideas on these issues. And we also contributed to the National Fistula Strategy in the Congo. Lastly, in alignment with the Feed the Future initiative that USAID is investing in Africa, promoting agriculture sector as a means of economic growth is a high priority for USAID. In fiscal year 2010, programs assisted nearly 40,000 households and more than 500 producers associations in improving agricultural management practices and use of technology. In conclusion, despite many of the complex challenges to the development, U.S. foreign assistance is making a difference, with children being reunited with their families after being abducted, trafficked, or abused. Low-income women are accessing judicial system for the first time, and we're encouraging the expansion of that program. Healthcare workers are gaining skills necessary both for preventative as well as curative measures, and farmers are learning better ways to grow and process and distribute their crops. Across many areas where foreign assistance is needed, we're promoting an approach in DRC that addresses short-term, immediate-term, and long-term sustainable development. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for your attention to development issues in DRC, and I look forward to answering your questions and providing additional information.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and without objection, both of your full statements will be made a part of the record. Let me start off by Mr. Affleck and his testimony with regards to the elections. And I know, Ms. Jendelayo, you made the point that there's a $350 million gap as it relates to the upcoming elections. And, you know, I would ask you if you could address whether or not you think that gap will be bridged and by whom. And in his testimony, Mr. Affleck says he requests that the U.S. government takes a hard look at its current commitment to support the elections and ask if offering the assistance needed to truly support a free and fair election is actually there. And he asks a number of questions, and he says the time for a decision is upon us. With national elections only 8 months away, the U.S. is not focused on the Congo. How will that gap be bridged, if you could, Mr. Ambassador? And secondly, with regards to the conflict minerals strategy, which was due in mid-January, is that going to be forthcoming soon, or perhaps has it been sent up today? If you could give us a timeline for that and maybe give us an idea of what will be included. The issue of army reform remains a very serious issue, and I wonder if you could update us on how military reform is proceeding. On trafficking, Congo obviously is a Tier 3 country now. It has dropped. In the recommendations made in the TIP report, one of the key recommendations is to investigate and punish military and other law enforcement personnel accused of unlawfully conscripting child soldiers, and then it goes on from there. And I'm wondering if you could tell us, because this report was issued last year in the beginning of summer, whether or not any progress has been made in the area of trafficking, both for sex and labor and for child soldiering, if you could address that. On the fistula repair, congratulations and kudos to the USAID for the work you're doing on repair. At 1,000, do you anticipate that the numbers will go up in terms of actual repair of fistulas? And by how many? Do you have a glide slope as to, you know, how you hope to build out the capacity for fistula? And on the issue of faith-based, we will be hearing from the Catholic Relief Services in our second panel, and they make a very cogent argument as to why faith-based is critical in Congo, and I would argue for all of sub-Saharan Africa, if we want to mitigate HIV/AIDS, if we want to combat all health issues. The estimates are up to 70%, as you know, of health care is provided by faith-based organizations or churches in Africa, and it would seem we would want to more faithfully utilize that that mechanism, and if you could speak to whether or not that is where you think we go in the future as well as in the present. And then on MONUSCO, during my trip, part of what caused me to go there was the ongoing problem. You know, it's bad enough that soldiers in the Congolese army and militia groups are committing heinous crimes against women, but to our shock and dismay, we discovered that the peacekeepers, in like manner, but in a very smaller number, were committing these kinds of crimes against young children. Mr. Payne will remember that I actually had 3 hearings on the abuse by peacekeepers. We heard from Jane Hall Lute from the UN, who was then heading up the office. She's now over at Homeland Security as number 2. But she was emphatic that there needs to be a zero-tolerance policy vis-a-vis peacekeepers and women and children. And at the time, we were talking about zero compliance. And I know that's changed, but we're told that there are some 33 allegations of sexual misconduct since January of 2010 to February of this year. And one of my arguments has been you need investigators to make sure that if there is an allegation, it's followed up on. And there are now only 2 OIOS investigators in Goma, which I think enables, however unwittingly, that these crimes are committed. So if you could address that as well.
In terms of the elections that are being held in November, AID sees it as part of a broader international strategy required to build a coalition on democratic transformation in Congo. And we have 3 challenges. One is a partner in terms of financial resources. We are contributing to a basket fund at the moment, and we're working with the European donors to see how that gap can be filled and how rapidly it can be filled in the coming months. The second issue we're facing is the capacity of the national institutions to actually take international support and technical assistance with some degree of support from our regional organizations. So in terms of funding, we have contributed $5 million to the basket fund, and we're working with our other partners to see how we can fill the gap at the moment.
Could I ask, during the last elections, how much we contributed?
I think I would have to get back to you. I don't want to give you a wrong.
It was significantly higher, I know that.
No, it was well over, I think, $80 million to it.
Just to follow up on the elections, you know, during the 2006 elections, I was an observer with the U.S. government observers, and also the ambassador was Roger Meese, who is now head of MONUSCO. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, it was a very difficult, it was a very challenging process, and to register and just to identify who the voters are. And, you know, we used a variety of resources, the Catholic Church, who register their parishioners, faith-based groups who are working throughout the area. And so we used very innovative and creative ways to do it. And going to the criticisms of the electoral process, we try to make it as transparent as possible and in each successive election to be better than the last one. And we have a country with so many challenges as the DRC, and more important is the lack of capacity and in institutions. Those are challenges that we work with our partners and also with the DRC to overcome in order to ensure that these elections are as better than the ones before and that there's a system or progress. So, I guess we should go to your other questions.
If you could.
Right. On the conflict minerals legislation that's been completed, it should be submitted to the Congress. And as you and the Congress have directed, we have addressed the issue on security and exchange regulatory process. And just to kind of briefly oversight, on the conflict minerals, we're really enhancing how to protect those areas in conflict, enhance civilian regulation of the resource trade, protect artisan miners and local communities, strengthen regional and international efforts to monitor and protect civilians, and then to promote responsible trade of resources. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, the DRC is perhaps one of the richest countries in the world. It's extraordinarily lush, it's green, it could be the breadbasket. I want to give you one story that, you know, we've been talking to other donors in other countries who are benefiting from these minerals and resources, the Chinese. One thing that the Chinese told us was we found fascinating. There's more arable land in the Congo than all of China. Yet China is able to meet the basic needs of a population that's 20 times greater than the DRC. Why is that? What is it that we need to do more with our Congolese partners to ensure that we have a rich country that meets the benefits of its people and also the region? You know, and the water productivity of that area can fuel energy for half of the African continent. And so these are things that are really dramatic and things that we are trying to work on and we're very excited about. The other issues, too, that I want to issue is on the TIP report. Yes, on the TIP, the DRC is a third-tier TIP. We have, of course, removed the DRC reluctantly from AGOA benefits. But it came after 2 years of consistently asking the DRC government to address certain human rights abuses. And we offered assistance and help and support. And we will continue to do so. We wanted to see that to the benefit of the people, it has to be part of AGOA, but it also has to address the people. And those are some of the things that I know you're very passionate that you addressed is the efforts of faith-based groups such as CRS and other groups. You're absolutely correct. You know, we provide right now on the continent anywhere from $6.4 billion to about $6.8 billion in total assistance to the African continent. Of that, 85% is administered through NGO groups. Most of them are faith-based. And what we've learned on the faith basis, we've learned it's tremendous accuracy, a low overhead cost, and they have very creative and innovative approaches. This is a lot of the other groups that we have worked with. And we must commend a lot of the works that they have done to address some basic problems that are facing Africa today. And let me just highlight one thing that addresses what my colleague Raja and what we in the United States government is trying to address is how do you address the violence against women? And one of the things that we have worked with on the faith-based groups is some innovative programs which tries to elevate the status of women without elevating the status of women, to show girls that their moms are really the heroes in the family. Then we're going to have problems. And one of the creative programs that we have is we have community-based development. In other words, we have kids who are going to community schools. Then we have moms who we give loans. And we now know that women, on average, will repay loans at a rate of 95%, much higher than men. And then for the men, looking at agricultural techniques and technologies, and then have that community strengthened and bonded, and it's sustainable. And what happens, we found, is that it raises the status of women, helps girls' education, and expands to other communities. And so those are things that we have learned in working with our NGO and faith-based groups to expand. The next thing is, and I want to turn to Raja, is on the FARDC and on MONUSCO problems. In our approach, our $306 million area, we are looking at security sector reform. Without the security sector reform, you're not going to have a security force, which is reliable, dependable, and accountable to the people. You want forces that are going to protect you, not be a problem and a source of crime and violence against the people. What we're doing right now is on one area is to promote accountability through training and prosecution. You need to have accountability and to hold people responsible for their actions. The other issue is advocating demilitarizations and strengthening payment systems to ensure that the security forces are going to be paid. We're looking at mobile banking services to ensure that money gets into the accounts so that, let's say, the commanders are not pilfering the money of their NCOs or the other military trainees. The other thing is to train police forces to serve as a basis to help protect civilians and protect the rights of civilians. The other issue is on MONUSCO. As you remember, Mr. Chairman, and of course when Congressman Payne was also there, we looked at the abuse of MONUC. And at that time, the SRSG was Ambassador Bill Swing, and the ambassador was Roger Meese. We worked extremely hard to look at how we can do training and advancement programs. So right now we're looking at our programs and projects on how we can advance and promote the professionalization within the FARDC troops, but also within MONUSCO now, to ensure that you have the highest qualities. And in that context, let me just tell you, in the State Department, we have over the last decade trained 120,000 troops. That's 36 battalions from 24 partner countries. And what they're doing now is to address African problems through African solutions. Of those 120,000, 77,000 remain in peacekeeping operations. We monitor them, we keep track of them. And of those, 33,000 are in UN operations. And we know that their quality is good and that they are attracted and maintain a high quality. And that's what we need to do, not only in the DRC, but in other parts of Africa where we see instability.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the issue regarding trafficking in persons, we're approaching it from a human rights issue, and in that regard, we have spent approximately $3 million in anti-trafficking projects in DRC, working with UNICEF in Ituri district to reintegrate former soldiers, help them put in systems to monitor families and communities where this is taking place. In addition, we're working with the International Organization of Migration to build awareness and capacity of the government of the Democratic Republic to stop this and to address the issues raised in the Tier 3 status that they've been given. On the issue of fistula repairs, we're finding in our assessment of our current activities that so far we've dealt with repairs as part of the violence generated by in the war and conflict situation, but we think there's also fistula issues regarding the domestic violence and frequency of birth and the high and the population increases that are happening in communities. So we're approaching it both from as a treatment for gender-based violence as well as domestic violence and sort of population issues regarding young girls who are having children quite young, at a young age, as well as the number of children they're having, which is also another reason for the fistula situation in the Congo. On the issue regarding faith-based organizations and working with communities, we believe the fundamental issue of community reconciliation has to be done through local organizations. Promoting community reconciliation can't be done at the state organizations or at the national institutions. So we have done, we're at the moment working with our colleagues in OTI and other places in the East to see what organizational network, social networks that exist currently, and how do we tap into those social networks, including churches and mosques and other institutions on the ground. In terms of elections, that's another challenge we're facing. As my colleague Ambassador Yamamoto said, we view this as a transformation. How do we set benchmarks for assessing progress in that process? In 2006, I also was in Congo with Ambassador Swing's office at that time, and we see that each election is an opportunity for us not only to fund the event, the idea of an election, but all of the consequences that we would have to deal with on the parliamentary, what institutions do we have to build so the next election. So we are managing our resources between the immediate event investments as well as what it requires for state building and capacity on the parliamentary level. We're also preparing for the state level elections that have been postponed to see how we can encourage and revive that strategy with the government a little bit more. And lastly, in terms of all of these issues, Mr. Chairman, that we're dealing with ungoverned spaces. So development in ungoverned spaces means currently we're dealing with the consequences of ungoverned spaces. So of this 11 provinces in Congo, 7 are viewed in the eastern areas which are considered sort of ungoverned on many levels, but there are 40 million other people in the rest of the Congo that we are balancing the immediate complex interventions for complex crises, but also continuing to invest in the other parts that are stable. So those are the issues that we're managing at the moment. In terms of the budget, Administrator Shaw is coming up to the Hill next week, and I would leave that to him to talk about Congo as part of the broader budget issues.
Thank you. I thank you both. Just a note, not a question. I want to thank you for including in your written submission some of the very laudatory and outstanding accomplishments, especially in the area of mitigating maternal mortality. As you point out, we've enabled over 351,000 deliveries. And as we know, the greatest way of mitigating maternal mortality is by having a skilled birth attendant available to deal with complications, especially if a cesarean section might be needed. So that is very good news contained in your testimony. Mr. Payne.
Thank you very much. It's been mentioned, Secretary Clinton visited Eastern Congo, and she really was very moved and gave a very strong report about what was going on there. I was on that trip, although I left before she visited the Congo. But in my assessment, the U.S. needs to refocus all parts of our government on achieving clear results in two critical issues, which were actually mentioned on her trip. The first priority should be to bring greater stability and to reduce civilian suffering in Eastern Congo. And the second priority would be to ensure that next year's elections will take place, will be fair and free. So I just wonder if you could just comment very quickly on those two. I have a series of questions.
You're absolutely correct, Mr. Congressman. Stability is key, and that's really part of our security sector reform approach, which I just explained in the testimony. And the other issue is on the elections. Is yes, the elections are a key indicator for those progress. And yes, there's going to be problems. Yes, there's going to be areas that we need greater improvement on. And yes, there will be questions on it. But as long as we can continue to make the progress and development we have since 2006, we should be in a good shape as we head to the next elections as well. Raja, you want to?
In terms of the elections, after USAID's experience in Sudan recently and the enormous international lift that it took to make the referendum happen, I think we're working toward what institutions can we lay the groundwork for now as we set the tone for both the subnational elections that we hope will take place. And I think it's a commitment to the democratic transformation of Congo is a critical element of our aid strategy at the moment.
And you didn't have the dollar amount that we contributed to the 06 elections and what is in the budget for the 11 elections?
Right. The 06, I can come back to you with that. I'm sorry about that. On the 11, it's part of the budget discussions that Administrator Shaw would like to talk with as part of the overall DG budgets we're looking for within the agency, both for Africa and for the agency.
Because, of course, if we can almost guarantee failure if we do not supply the appropriate. It was daunting at the last election, which I attended also, and simply the logistics of getting ballots to remote places. You had to use helicopters, and thankful, as I mentioned, South Africa was able to bring in aircraft to deliver ballots and then pick them up after the election. So Congo was so important, and we could almost, like I said, guarantee a failure if we don't have the proper amount of it, which of course comes to the Congress. You know, you all don't appropriate. That's something that we need to perhaps have a discussion with us on this side of the of Washington. Just have a could you give me a definition of difference between MONUC and MONUSCO, it tends to gets gray sometimes. So anyone have we'll try to take a shot at that. I don't want either one of you to jump at it, but.
In French or? Yeah, leave it to you.
The issue with the progress between MONUC and MONUSCO was on the mandate. In other words, to articulate exactly what the precise mandate would be for the UN operation. And one of the things that was additional or added to that was in what circumstances will these the forces address the FDLR, the LRA process. And one of the additions to the MONUSCO mandate was looking much more at the LRA problem. But I would have to go back to you and refer to other experts who know the precise technical and legal distinctions between the two.
Mm-hmm. Initially, they were criticized, I guess was early on, about their lack of aggressiveness in their Chapter 7 mandate. There had been a reaffirmation of Chapter 7, and is there a more aggressive stance on the part of the forces?
The problem with the definitions is this ability to respond. I know that SRSG Roger Meese has requested more air assets, in other words, to address the ability to rapidly deploy his troops to areas of instability. And he gave the example of Equatorial, where you had disarmed groups coming in and taking over the airport temporarily, killing some of the UN peacekeepers as well as civilians. But those are some of the major challenges that are facing MONUSCO today. It's not only the budget, but also the capacity to respond quickly.
And we've also made a commitment. We've reinforced our message with the UN agencies that we're committed to a peacekeeping mission, and we wouldn't be able to do a lot of our work without the environment being created by the peacekeeping mission in the East at the moment. And we've made that message clear to the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo, who have come around to establishing a better relationship and improving their relationship with the peacekeeping mission.
And about the FDLR, initially they were very involved with the government in Kinshasa. However, there has seemed to be a position where the Kabila government have been working towards the infiltration of the FDLR. In other words, have the agreement between Rwanda and the DRC, is there an effort? At one time it seemed the FDLR were even a part of the Congolese forces. Have all of that changed, and is the Interahamwe and the ex-FAR that still roam around Eastern Congo still a problem?
Yes, Mr. Congressman, the FDLR remains a continued issue. From our Tripartite Plus process to today, we continue to work with the Rwandan groups as well as the Congolese, because the FDLR is a threat to both countries and to the regional stability, and also to the violence against the civilians, and really is a major stumbling block and obstacle to peace and stability in the region. And so that continues to be a top priority.
I had a chance to speak to Mr. Meese earlier in regard to even the CNDP. Now, Nkunda is under house arrest in Rwanda. Has that therefore lessened the tension there in the area, or is his forces still roaming and doing destructive work?
No, the Nkunda's detention or house arrest in Rwanda is one area, but you still have continued members of the FDLR who continues to roam. And then you also have other high-profile individuals who are creating havoc. And one of them, of course, is Bosco Ntaganda, who's an ICC-indicted war criminal and part of the groups. As you know, he fought with Kabila's forces, and he's extremely well armed. And so that remains a problem.
And also, I think one of the issues we're facing with the FDLR in terms of community development and reconciliation issues is the command and control is not clear on different parts of the East of where they have impact and where they don't in terms of command and control. So I think both the bilateral agreement between Rwanda and Congo gives one framework, but I think we'll have to work as international community at many levels, both at the political level, but also within communities who have reached out under the DDR program and other reconciliation efforts to see how we can minimize the damage that they do to the communities.
Okay, my time has just about expired, but I just wonder, what is the prospect of a special envoy being appointed? We wrote a letter back several months ago asking that a special envoy be considered once again. You know, we've had Mr. Swing was very effective, and what's the status now?
We're continuing to take that under advisement. After the departure of Howard Wolpe last year, is that we continue to do the work that he has started through our ambassadors and through Johnny Carson, who's made trips, as well as the Secretary and other senior officials. But again, depending on the budget and other objectives, et cetera, we continue to take that under advisement, Mr. Congress.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Ranking Member. Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for coming, and thank you for your testimony. The United States is constantly called upon to clean up messes throughout the world. And now that's a testament to the generosity of the American people, as well as to the philosophical ideals that guide us, and perhaps as well our unique position as an exceptional world power. But with that said, what is the relative nature of our assistance compared to European assistance, particularly France and Belgium, given the colonial legacy here?
In terms of the United States, we are still the largest donor in terms of our support in bilateral assistance, but our support through the peacekeeping agencies, in terms of our support through the UN service agencies like UNICEF. And we continue to lead on this. It depends also on certain sectors where our European partners have taken the lead in terms of the security sector, where the EU is in the lead, but in other areas we continue to be, in other sectors we continue to lead in regards to this.
Do you feel this is disproportionate in terms of the responsibility?
I think we're working with our partners to continuously find ways, because we partner with them on a number of other countries that are a priority for the U.S. government. So it's a balancing act between, Congo, Sudan, Liberia. So we're in constant discussions with our British partners, our Norwegians partners, the EU, the World Bank, both on the bilateral to see where we bring our relative expertise, we lead, where they bring their relative expertise and political will. So it's a constant negotiations between us and our partners.
All right. The second question, and perhaps, Mr. Ambassador, you could answer this. It is against the law in the United States to provide military assistance to countries who use child soldiers. Now, we have exceptions for that in terms of national security waivers, and this country has received one. But with that said, that doesn't absolve our responsibility from continuing to push at the highest possible diplomatic levels to end this pernicious practice. What specifically is being done in this regard?
We have overall on the child soldiers, it's not just in the Congo, but it's throughout the continent and, of course, around the world, as we establish on our GTIP rankings and to work with these countries to address those problems and to ensure that, A, they understand those problems, and number two, that they address them, and number three, that we work together to find a solution. And throughout Africa and other parts of Africa, from Chad and to other countries where there is reports of child soldiers, we have worked with those troops that we've helped, let's say, train to not only on Leahy vetting, but to ensure that they observe all the precepts and legal aspects that we have under our laws in distribution of funding and assistance. In the Congo area, it remains a challenge. But we remain committed to ensuring and to working hard so that the battalions that we train and also those that we work with are meeting the legal notes established by you and the Congress on the distribution of the assistance.
That perhaps is certainly an appropriate response for those areas that are under our direct influence, such as military assistance, direct military assistance and training. But in terms of a robust diplomatic push at the highest levels, what are we doing?
What we're trying to do right now is we're working with the FARDC troops, which is a major challenge, to work on military justice and also to ensure that they develop the justice systems to bring to justice those individuals who are in violation, not only those who have violated the law in participation in rape and human rights abuse, but also those who have conscripted and trained child soldiers. And that becomes an accountability issue under the judicial and legal system that we're trying to develop within the DRC, and that's something our USAID colleague is working on. And for our part is working with to ensure the professionalization of the military as well as the police to follow up and to work with the communities and sectors so that these abuses do not occur. But again, it's going to be a long-term process, but we are making those efforts.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Carnahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations again on your chairmanship and leadership of this subcommittee. It's great to be here with Ranking Member Mr. Payne. We noticed a slight New Jersey tilt to the leadership here, but we do appreciate you being here and really bringing attention to this topic today. I just want to say a personal welcome to Ambassador Yamamoto for his leadership and for time we spent with him in Ethiopia and for the great work that you did there. This topic is very timely in terms of assessing our effectiveness in the international community's efforts to address these challenges from ethnic conflict, government corruption, extreme poverty, and widespread human rights abuses. And in particular, the sexual and gender-based violence against women and children here on this day, I think, is especially important, being International Women's Day. Also, we've heard many talk about the high risk of relapse there. When there was concerted effort around the elections in 2006, many believe that we mistakenly scaled down our efforts there in terms of democracy, governments, and political engagement. And so certainly as we lead up to this next national election, I think it's important that we have a robust international engagement there. I've seen some statistics with regard to there being over 14,000 new cases of sexual violence reported in the DRC, including thousands of child victims. And my question is, how is USAID and its bilateral assistance working to specifically address the needs of children in the eastern Congo, and how is the U.S. assisting UNICEF in their efforts to address these challenges? And I'd like to start with Ambassador Yamamoto.
Thank you, sir. We continue to look at when I was traveling throughout the DRC before my ambassadorship to Ethiopia and now here, is the issue of the high rate of violence, not only against women, but civilian areas, and the high rate of death. And you're talking anywhere from 800 to 1,100 deaths from violence each and every day in the Congo. It's unacceptable and prohibitively high. What we tried to do through our budgeting and assistance, and not only us, but also in coordination with our donor community and with other groups, is to look at how we can address the needs of the communities to ensure not only security sector reforms, but also to look at how we can bring strength and dynamism to these communities to protect themselves against the violence. And that encourages not only security sector reforms to address the training of forces, but also on the other side on the justice system to hold people accountable and that they go through a court procedures and processes. Now, I want to turn to my colleague Raja, who can kind of go into details on the programs that we have implemented.
Great. Thank you.
In terms of the sexual and gender-based violence, we work on sort of on 3 levels. One is to survivors have access to critical care and treatment, and that both women and children come through our service providers. Second is to expand the current, we have 5,000 local service providers that we want to expand the number of those providers that provide services to children. And then lastly, we deal with 250 local organizations to deal with psychological counseling and treatment. And in terms of UNICEF, we have worked with them in Ituri in Eastern Congo on protection, on medical services, on psychosocial services, and about 1,000 children have gone through all 3 of them. They come in waves, and we support UNICEF and fund them for these services throughout Eastern Congo. And they then use those services to deal with community. Issues of women and children, at least in aid portfolio, we deal with in terms of reconciliation at the community level, livelihoods. We have youth issues. A large part of it is youth. And then we also deal with them through health care and then local administration issues. So we kind of view it as a cross-cutting issue where we have opportunities to support women and children. It should be something that goes across all of our interventions, in addition to the targeted interventions we provide for specific treatments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bass. Thank you, Russ.
You've made several, both of you have made several references to the upcoming elections, and I just wanted to ask if you could specifically talk about what specific steps you think the United States could or should take immediately and in the upcoming months to assist in helping to prevent a fraudulent election, if there is hope that it could be done in a way, given the decision that was made to revise the Constitution in January to reduce the number of election rounds from 2 to 1, is there hope that it could be viewed legitimately? And then what contingency plans are the U.S. and the international community discussing should violence occur? I know it's not an automatic that because they made that constitutional change that it's going to be viewed fraudulently.
Very important on the violence is obviously the MONUSCO plays a critical role as far as on the security, but also on the electoral processes. In 2006, they were very key in getting the ballots out and bringing the ballots back. Right now, the USAID has provided $5 million for training, voter registration, and voter education, which remains key. And also to continue to reach out through the educational process to bring in as many of the people who are eligible to vote, to be a participant in these electoral process. The other issue, too, is on the ballot counting as well. What we have done is to ensure that all the opposition groups do have members at the areas where the ballots are being counted. We have met very rigorously with all the opposition leaders who are potential candidates for the presidency, as well as many of the local candidates. And on the presidential level, obviously, that's Mobutu and Kamara, the former speaker, the parliamentary speaker, as well as President Kabila himself. And to understand, and not only to have a dialogue among all the groups and parties, but to work out systems and mechanisms and measures to work together to ensure that the ballot counting and the vote, there is a process in place which can be lived by and lived with by all the parties who are contesting the elections. But, yeah.
USAID has looks at this in terms of what institutions are critical to ensure that it's transparent and limit the fraud and really address the fundamental systemic changes that we need to do. So we're providing technical assistance to the Independent Elections Commission in the country. We're working with the Parliament to ensure that whatever elections legislation that is coming through is viewed through critical eye. And lastly, working with provincial administration at local levels to see how they can participate in this elections process to prevent it. The other critical element for us is the population. How do we get the population involved in ensuring that the fraud doesn't take place? How do they get information out there? How do we educate them in voter education so they report on the instances where they do find weaknesses in the process as it goes? And lastly is we recently received we were discussions with the other donors about elections observation teams from the international community and how to organize that in the coming months so that we as an international partnership are able to provide some views on what's going on in this process.
Thank you, Ms. Bass. Mr. McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for both of you. To what extent do you think the legislation that Senator Durbin and I got into the bill in terms of conflict mineral is actually going to have a positive effect in reducing the amount of money available to the rebels to carry on the chaos that's gone on in Kivu for the last 5, 6, 7 years?
Well, Mr. Congressman, as you know, we worked very closely with your staff members on that legislation, and let me say that that has remained a key aspect in our dealings with the DRC since for the last several years. And not only monitoring the conflict minerals, but also tracking it and also how it's being utilized, and denying those illegal traders from benefiting from those conflict minerals. What I think the legislation and what does is strengthen and support what we've been doing in the last several years, which is to the people and the civilians in areas where you have, tungsten, titanium, tantalum, and timber, have them benefit from the resources that are being mined. And I think that legislation helps us in that regards, and it strengthens those communities. And then the other issue, too, is to hold not only traders but also smelters and end users accountable to ensure that those monies and funds will benefit the people as well as those who are trading.
I think the impact of the legislation has been the due diligence that the companies are taking this seriously. We see a lot of companies that we are working with the government to say how do we establish a due diligence in this regard. The second area of impact is our ability to have them look at it as part of a broader the extractive ETI framework that we're providing technical assistance. And largely at the community level, again, is what role do they play in monitoring and tracking? And in that regard, we've invested in infrastructure to access these remote sites. And by preventing people from traveling in between these sites, they've been able to keep this process going. So we're also investing in rural infrastructure to access to these areas where we think that there's a high instance of trafficking in conflict minerals.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDermott. I'd like to thank our distinguished panel for your testimony. I would just echo the words of my good friend, the ranking member, Mr. Payne. Both he and I strongly hope that you will consider a special envoy or a special representative. Mr. Affleck makes a very strong and impassioned appeal for that in his testimony. I hope you stick around to hear it. And Mr. Pendergrass does the same. As a matter of fact, he even says, why is U.S. policy failing and what could be done about it? And that's one of his chief recommendations. So the sooner the better. Please name that special envoy so we have a truly coordinated strategy.
Actor Ben Affleck and Cindy McCain, the wife of Senator John McCain, testified in the second part of the Congo hearing. They're involved with the group providing humanitarian relief in eastern Congo.
I'd like to now welcome our next panel number 2, beginning with Mr. Ben Affleck, who is the founder of the Eastern Congo Initiative. In addition to a successful career as an actor, writer, and director, Mr. Affleck is also a passionate advocate and philanthropist. In March of 2010, he founded the Eastern Congo Initiative, or ECI, an advocacy and grant-making initiative with the mission of helping the Congolese people support local community-based approaches that create a sustainable and successful society in the long-troubled region. ECI is the first U.S.-based advocacy and grant-making initiative wholly focused on working with and for the people of Eastern Congo. Since 2007, Mr. Affleck has made multiple trips to Africa with a focus on Eastern Congo. He has focused on understanding the causes and consequences of conflict on the continent and learning about African solutions to the problems affecting the DRC. We'll then hear from Ms. Francesca Vigowash, who is who's with the Catholic Relief Services Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Advisor, spearheading the effort to incorporate SGBVA prevention and response into CRS programming in conflict and disaster-affected communities worldwide. Ms. Vigowash has nearly a decade of refugee camp management and protection experience with the UN and various NGOs working with displaced communities in the Balkans, Latin America, and Africa, and has spent a considerable amount of time in Eastern Congo helping CRS and its local partners design effective responses to psychosocial, medical, and economic needs of survivors of sexual violence. We will also then hear from Mr. John Prendergast, who is a human rights activist and best-selling author who has worked for peace in Africa for over 25 years. He is co-founder of the Enough Project, an initiative to end genocide and crimes against humanity affiliated with the Center for American Progress. Mr. Prendergast has worked with the White House under President Clinton, the State Department, 2 members of Congress, National Intelligence Council, UNICEF, Human Rights Watch, the International Crisis Group, and the U.S. Institute of Peace. He has authored or co-authored 10 books and has appeared on numerous TV programs, and as I said earlier, has been here frequently before this subcommittee. And I also would like to, if she would like to come to the witness table, Cindy McCain, who, as I said earlier, has been a leader on issues dealing with health care for Africa, including the American Voluntary Medical Team, leading several medical missions to developing and war-torn nations. She is the wife of the distinguished senator from Arizona, John McCain, but she's also worked with CARE, Operation Smile, and the land removal group, the Halo Trust. Mr. Affleck, if you would proceed.
Thank you very much. This is very excited about this, and it's a great honor. So thank you all very much for including me today. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee, my name is Ben Affleck, and I am the founder of the Eastern Congo Initiative. ECI is the only U.S.-based grant-making and advocacy organization entirely focused on working with and for the people of Eastern Congo, an area that carries the unwanted distinction of being the deadliest and most volatile region of the country and one of the deadliest in the world. According to the United Nations, the crisis in Eastern Congo has displaced an estimated 1.7 million Congolese and has led to over 1,000 rapes being committed every month. The International Rescue Committee estimates that 5.4 million people have lost their lives in the conflict since 1998. Many of these deaths were children under the age of 5. Not all were killed in combat, but rather perished from the ravages that accompany this horrific region: malaria, pneumonia, malnutrition, and diarrhea. ECI invests in Congolese efforts that help protect the most vulnerable among the population in Congo, including child soldiers, survivors of sexual violence. ECI works closely with community-based groups focused on education, economic opportunity, capacity building, and legal reform. I thank you for your attention to Congo and for holding this important hearing. On behalf of ECI, I request to submit a complete written statement for the record. Today's hearing occurs on the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day, which I also think is important to recognize, and I think it's particularly appropriate to call attention to this, to the particular suffering of women and girls in eastern Congo, as well as the undeniable strength they exhibit in the face of ongoing atrocities. I'm also pleased to recognize Cindy McCain, who is with us here today and who recently joined ECI as a founding member and investor. Cindy and I just returned from eastern Congo, where we saw firsthand the tragedy and triumph of the Congolese people. While large parts of eastern Congo remain under the control of armed groups, there are many reasons, most of them rooted in the strength and fortitude of their people, to be hopeful about Congo's future. I want to share with you the story of a remarkable woman named Laba Kamana, who exemplifies the potential of the Congolese people to transform themselves and their society. Laba was captured by rebel soldiers at the age of 14 in South Kivu and held as a sex slave for over 2 years. She was raped every day virtually by her captors until she found her freedom through the thick jungle and what makes up the second largest rainforest in the world. She discovered she was pregnant with the child of one of her rapists. The counselors of a remarkable Congolese organization called Let Africa Live found Laba. They took her in. They provided her with counseling and job training. And while caring for her new daughter, she used her skills to start a small business and earn enough income to return to school. Laba is now 22 years old. I met her. She was wonderful. She's in her 3rd year of studying law, and she advocates for the rights of women using her own story. Since my first visit to Congo more than 5 years ago, I've witnessed remarkable efforts to improve governance, promote economic growth, and reduce conflict. Unfortunately, despite some positive movement, the record over these last 5 years is not promising. Congo risks heading into another deeper spiral of violence that could lead to more fighting and suffering, and that could risk destabilizing surrounding African countries. In 2006, millions of Congolese voted for the first time in a free and fair democratic election, voting in more than 50,000 polling places around the country. The Congolese people elected Joseph Kabila as president. It was a period of great excitement and high hopes, and the United States, indeed, as testified to by some of the other panelists, played a very important role. Starting in 2007, the U.S., along with others in the West, drew back involvement. Instead of continuing a high level of engagement to consolidate a new and fragile democracy, Congo was treated as if it was a well-functioning state from which the United Nations mission in Congo could be safely withdrawn. This notion was quickly dispelled when rebels waged a new battle against the government in eastern Congo in 2007 and 2008 that brought another terrible round of death, displacement, and destruction. Our government has a long history of involvement in the Congo, from our shameful role in the murder of Patrice Lumumba and the 3 decades support of Mobutu to some very admirable recent efforts. In the early 2000s, the United States government helped bring to the table various forces then fighting in Congo. The U.S. government also provided key early funding for the 2006 elections and played a major role in helping peace and development return to the Congo. About this, there is no question. In the past few years, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, as also testified to by Ambassador Yamamoto, visited the region, and USAID has escalated its efforts in eastern Congo. Also, USAID has provided millions of dollars in humanitarian assistance to the Congo since the mid-1990s. This commitment has indeed paid dividends in Congo. But with conflict persisting and elections coming up, we must develop a cohesive strategy and fully engage on this issue. Today, with national elections only 8 months away, on November 27th, the U.S. is not focused on Congo, even with events like last week's attack on the President's residence in Kinshasa. That, paired with Congo's recent history, should remind everybody of the fragility of Congo's progress and stability. The United States government can and should play an active role in ensuring this November's elections are free and fair. An electoral outcome that is questioned could easily perpetuate another downward spiral of violence, division, and rupture. And the last time Congo collapsed, armies came in from across Africa, and I said before, 5 million people died. 5 million people have died since 1998 because of the conflict in eastern Congo. We must learn from history and do our part to see that this never happens again. In this time of heightened concern over federal spending, some suggest that austerity demands we turn a blind eye to the crisis in Congo. I believe nothing could be more misguided. It would simply be penny wise and pound foolish to allow the Congo to again fall into a state of crisis or further humanitarian chaos. If Congo were to collapse again, as members of this subcommittee know full well, the United States would respond generously with humanitarian assistance. We would try to save lives. But we have to do better. Our goal must be to avert humanitarian disaster by proactive investment and stronger diplomacy. The path to stability in today's Congo requires fostering stable elections and preventing another disaster that could easily require hundreds of millions of dollars in assistance. I humbly suggest that the U.S. government take a hard look at its current commitment and find a way to do more. Come November, we must be able to look ourselves in the eye and say that we did what our principles demanded. We helped democracy emerge in a place where tragedy was the alternative. In November 2010, the Eastern Congo Initiative released a white paper. Here it is. Strengthening United States foreign policy in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You know, they do titles differently in D.C. than we do back home. This paper, commissioned and reviewed by experts, encourages steps the U.S. should take to promote progress in Congo. I request a summary of the paper should be included in the record of this hearing.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I've included a more detailed explanation of the steps we believe are necessary in the written testimony. 1. The U.S. government must do more to support a multidimensional strategy to protect civilians, women, girls, boys, and men, from the onslaught of violence in eastern Congo. 2. The U.S. government must do more to support the 2011 elections, which we've heard about already a little bit today. In addition to providing diplomatic support, the U.S. should support robust election monitoring by Congolese civil society and by credible international organizations. 3. To ensure that the United States steps up to the serious challenges to stability in Africa posed by the Congo, the President or the Secretary of State should appoint a special representative to the Great Lakes region of Central Africa. The appointment should occur as soon as possible in order to coordinate the U.S. response to the challenges in the Congo. We also believe that the treatment of conflict minerals, demobilization, and security sector reform, as well as the Lord's Resistance Army, are of serious concern and deserve a comprehensive approach and cohesive strategy. This is an ambitious agenda, but it can be accomplished. In December 2005, then Senator Obama introduced a bill called the Democratic Republic of Congo Relief, Security, and Democracy Promotion Act of 2006. This bill had a bipartisan list of Senate co-sponsors, including then Senator Hillary Clinton. On December 6, 2006, it was passed by the House by voice vote. On December 22, 2006, President Bush signed the bill into law. The majority of our recommendations are found in this very law. They simply need to be implemented. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your very strong support of this important legislation. We place special emphasis on full diplomatic support for the upcoming elections and the reappointment of a Great Lakes Special Advisor in the State Department. This special advisor would serve as a point of accountability and an important and necessary coordinating function. Maybe most relevant in these tough economic times, this appointment would inevitably ensure efficiencies are found across multiple investments and diplomatic efforts. We strongly believe that if we continue to place Congo on the back burner of U.S. policy, it will indeed come back to haunt us. The federal budget may indeed be a zero-sum game, but our morality, our sense of decency, our compassion for our fellow human beings is not. Recognizing one tragedy need not diminish understanding and empathy for another. Our basic humanity, our sense of compassion, is not a fixed number. It expands with our vision. It can grow with our purpose. But our moral compass is fixed. Our sunrise, our east as a nation, even when we have failed, has always pointed us towards what's right. Now, not what's easy, not what's cheap, but what we can live with, and how we can sleep with ourselves at night. The values we hold true are priceless to us. They are the soul of our nation. They are rooted in our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our Declaration of Independence. We believe in being free from the tyranny of violence. We believe in life and liberty, and we believe that basic human rights are not just important, they're not just something to be worked toward, but a fundamental right to be demanded for all mankind. These ideas make us who we are. They make us great. But if our foreign policy does not reflect these ideals, it completely undermines them. I have seen firsthand the determination and the promise of the Congolese people. I hope you will consider visiting Eastern Congo to learn and see what I have. Any of you are welcome to come with me. The Congolese people simply want to live their lives in peace earn a decent living, and raise their families, just like the rest of us. They want a voice in their country's governance. I will never give in to the naysayers who suggest Congo is hopeless or too complex. It is not. The 70 million people of Congo deserve a better tomorrow, and the Eastern Congo Initiative will do our small part to ensure that it does. It is in the interest of all of us here to support the people of the Congo move forward toward democracy and respect for human rights, and to move away from the multiple crises and horrors of the last 15 years. Thank you very much. It really is an honor to be here, and I'm happy to expand on any of these points to answer your questions. Thanks.
Mr. Affleck, thank you so very much for your very eloquent and passionate statement, and I do hope that the White House and the Capitol, the Congress, is listening to your strong appeal. Congo cannot be on the back burner of U.S. foreign policy, and I think, as Mr. Payne and I have made very clear, I think every member of our panel, we strongly want that special envoy, that special representative yesterday. And so your appeal today, I think, could be a pivoting point for the administration to say, now do it. Time is running out. So thank you so very much. I'd like to now introduce Ms. Vigo Walsh, and thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit my written statement for the record, and I will briefly summarize.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, for calling this very important hearing today and for giving Catholic Relief Services the opportunity to testify. I would also like to thank the ranking member, Mr. Payne. Mr. Smith, I know how passionate you are about advocating for the survivors of sexual and gender-based violence in the Congo. And Mr. Payne, I know that your interest in the region has led you to travel to Congo several times, even dating back to when it was still called the Zaire. Let me also thank Mr. McDermott for his role as one of the original authors of the Congo conflict minerals provision that recently became law. This provision will help to curb sexual violence in the Congo. This morning in Bukavu, close to 180,000 women marched in the streets, advocating for their own rights, today being their day, International Women's Day. They marched behind a banner that stated, "We can stop violence," and they had slogans that included two key demands. The first being, impunity for rapists must cease, and the second being that women must be included in all the political processes. As the Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Advisor for Catholic Relief Services, I focus a lot of my efforts on the Congo, just because of the sheer magnitude of the problem there. And in this capacity, I've had the privilege of working for and with many of the women that marched some of the women that marched this morning. In Eastern Congo, today is a cry for women to no longer be used as a battleground. And here, it is a call for us to even make greater efforts to help them. CRS, which has been working in the DRC since 1961, partners with the local Catholic Church to address the scourge of sexual violence. The Church has an extensive network throughout the most remote areas of the country. This network allows us to reach the most isolated rape survivors. Also, in the absence of an effective and functioning government administration, the Catholic Church has provided most of the basic services, such as health care and education, for decades. It has thus gained the trust of the population. In Eastern Congo, I have repeatedly come across rape survivors who have walked many kilometers from their displacement camp to seek support at the nearest parish. The fear of stigmatization by their fellow camp dwellers, coupled with the trust in the Church, drives them to seek assistance there. Together, we have implemented numerous activities to respond to this crisis. We've provided access to life-changing fistula repair surgeries, psychosocial training for counselors, and trauma healing for thousands of survivors in 4 provinces, income-generating and entrepreneurial skills for at least 1,500 rape survivors, community training to mobilize military, police, and transitional justice leaders, and most recently, an innovative community-based early warning and protection project in 3 provinces. The funding for these projects do come from a variety of sources, but the great majority of them come from the United States government. This partnership between the United States government, CRS, and the Church in Congo extends the reach and magnifies the impact of U.S. government assistance into remote areas with needy, vulnerable populations that could not be reached otherwise. It is critically important that the U.S. government maintain and expand this support for the essential responses I've just described, as well as preserving and strengthening its partnership with the Church and other faith-based organizations. If the DRC is to have a future, the hundreds of thousands of women who have been raped must continue to be able to access these services. And even within the context of scarce resources today, the U.S. can and should do more to combat the conditions that foster the use of rape as a weapon of war. I'd like to make these additional recommendations. 1, the U.S. must use its leverage as a donor and as a partner to press the Congolese government to fulfill its security mandate, uphold human rights, and genuinely work to protect its civilians. The Congolese government has requested more military support recently, such as the training of more battalions. The U.S. government, has to link this support to measurable changes in key areas. 2, the U.S. should condition its assistance on progress against impunity and survivor access to justice. As long as ranking military officers who condone and perpetrate rape roam free, or as long as civilians accused of rape dollars to get a free out of jail card, sexual violence will persist. 3, the U.S. government should urge the Congolese government with its previous commitments to include women in the political and peace processes. They should be respected and included and prepared for elections. Indeed, violence against women in the DRC is symptomatic of women's second-class status and marginalization from decision-making. Women have been consistently excluded from previous peace processes and continue to be sidelined from political power. One of the women who led in the march in Bukavu this morning is the director of the Diocesan Office for Women's Issue, Sandro Lame. When I telephoned her yesterday to tell her about this hearing, she was ecstatic because she knows the political leverage that the United States government has with the Congo. She drafted a declaration alongside her counterparts in the Muslim and Protestant communities and urged me to make these recommendations. Ultimately, in order to eradicate sexual and gender-based violence in the DRC, we need to stop the wider, more generalized conflict. The United States government needs to more urgently engage diplomatically. The United States government can lead the process that will end the fighting and increase women's participation in the political sphere. The magnitude of the seemingly never-ending humanitarian crisis and the potential for the fragile situation to get even worse demands a proportionate response. At this critical juncture with elections coming, the United States government must rise to the task as it did in the Sudan. And as long as violence persists, the U.S. must continue to support the life-saving partnership with faith-based institutions in the DRC. Thank you.
Ms. Vigo-Walsh, thank you so very much, and thank you for the absolutely encouraging news about the 180,000 women marching. That is just incredible, and hopefully, in a small way, this hearing and the follow-up that we will do, it is all ongoing, but I think this is an important venue to say now is the time for the administration to do much more, and that goes for us as well. So thank you for that wonderful news. Mr. Prendergast.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Payne, for your ongoing commitment to Congo and human rights throughout Africa. I'd like to ask that my testimony be submitted to the record and to People magazine, hat tip to Mr. Affleck. I'd also like to set aside my written testimony to say a few things this afternoon about this unique moment that Congo is facing. While women were marching in Congo in Bukavu this morning, the 180,000, two of my colleagues from Enough were in Goma this morning and talked with one of the leading women's rights advocates in the country, Justine Masika, who everyone probably in this panel knows, and some of you know, and Secretary Clinton met when she was in Congo in 2009. And for this hearing, Justine wanted to say the following, quote, "The link between conflict minerals and mass rape here in Congo is crystal clear. So the first and foremost priority for ending the war here in Congo is to set up a system to regulate the minerals trade. And the upcoming election," she said, "is the critical window to push the government of Congo on this issue, since it will try harder to please the population before the vote." Now, I was in Congo twice in the last 6 months, and I would strongly concur with Justine's assessment that this is an unparalleled moment of opportunity to make real changes in Congo. The election is the primary internal factor, no question. But the U.S. Congress's conflict minerals legislation, spearheaded by Congressman McDermott, is the primary external factor. And it has created a moment full of uncertainties and anxieties, but also of huge opportunities in the country. Now, before we get to these opportunities, I wanted to make one commercial timeout on why we focus so much on the economics of Congo's war. Of course, we believe the conflict there is about more than conflict minerals, but let's take a look at the broader agenda and how it is compromised by the mafia-like economy there. Now, everyone wants to reform, for example, the military. However, the military officer corps is the primary beneficiary of mining in the country. President Kabila stays in power by allowing these officers free rein to make as much money as they can and cratering the rule of law throughout the eastern third of the country. Number two, everyone wants to reform the justice system, of course. However, the military and civilian beneficiaries in government of this conflict minerals trade do not want a strong, efficient government. The rule of law will subvert this illegal economy, and the money now going into their pockets will go to the Treasury, and that's simply unacceptable to this mafia. The third thing I want to bring up is everyone, of course, wants to stop the FDLR and the other militias. However, they sustain themselves through mineral profits, and everyone knows that, and they often trade increasingly with the military itself, the Congolese military. Fourth, everyone wants clean elections. However, who in power would give up this gravy train? You lose and you're out. It's winner take all. They can't take that chance and they'll fix it. So everyone supports peace agreements, no question. However, even the peace deals in Congo can make matters worse if we don't deal with the economic fuel for war. 1.5 million Congolese people have been displaced since President Kagame and Kabila signed their peace agreement a year and a half ago. That's a tragic record. Back to the people of Congo. Ryan Gosselin and I went there over Thanksgiving. We met an extraordinary Congolese woman named Marie. Marie is a rape survivor twice over, and she has overcome her own trauma to found a women's organization that helps other women who have survived sexual crimes. We asked her what she recommends, and she said the following: "Please stop this bloody business. You are fueling conflict. Families are being torn apart, women are being raped, communities are being destroyed so armed groups can profit from the mines. Companies should stop supporting this and do ethical business," she said. Well, the good news is that because of the congressional legislation, because of your legislation, every one of you championed this, companies have to start trying now to do this ethical business. And some companies are already moving ahead even beyond what the legislation is requiring them to do. But they need help from the United States government. And the key, I believe, as it has been on so many critical foreign policy issues in Africa, the key is the United States Congress. Two critical processes are coming to fruition now that this subcommittee and the wider Congress can influence. First, the Security and Exchange Commission is going to issue very soon implementing regulations for your conflict minerals legislation. We need to ensure that these regulations have serious teeth and do not delay the implementation of the bill. We have a letter that we're releasing today from Congolese civil society organizations making this very point, that we cannot countenance a delay in the implementation of the bill. Strong regulations will send a major signal to the actors in the supply chain that foment violence, that subvert the rule of law, that undermine good governance, that they have to clean up their act. Second major opportunity we have now is that the conflict minerals legislation, as was discussed, requires the executive branch to develop a strategy for dealing with conflict minerals and ending the violence. That's a first. executive branch hasn't been required by Congress to have a strategy to actually end this thing. We've always wanted to deal with the symptoms. The bill says, how are you going to end it? Well, that strategy was due over a month ago, but it's still being debated inside the administration. That's a good thing. That means you can have influence over what the Obama administration comes out with. This is a huge opportunity for the United States to make a critical difference in the Congo. We think Secretary Clinton should lead in putting together a stakeholders meeting that involves the regional governments, particularly Congo at the center, the companies that matter, the United States and the European Union, all together to launch a process that would result in an international certification system to end the conflict minerals trade in Central Africa. And we need a senior envoy to help spearhead this and all the other efforts that my fellow panelists and you have all spoken about and written to the administration about so passionately in the country and throughout the region. U.S. leadership has helped do this with diamonds. We've done it with forestry. We've done it with fisheries. We've done it with a number of other products where, when the United States helped lead in bringing the companies and governments in question together, standards were changed, and this positively has impacted the lives of millions and millions of people. Well, now it's Congo's turn. So if we act on the deadly minerals trade, it's not a magic wand, but it is a catalyst, and it's a domino that will help topple the edifice of greed and militarization that kills and rapes people in Congo at a higher rate than anywhere else in the world. Thank you very much for your leadership.
Mr. Pendergrass, thank you so very much for your passion and for your insights and counsel which you have provided to this committee and to Congress for many years. Thank you so much. As previously discussed and agreed by my friend Mr. Payne and I, the ranking member, I would ask unanimous consent to welcome Ms. Cindy McCain to speak and participate as a witness on this panel, even though we had not prior noticed it. Ms. McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't intend to take long at all, but I would like to thank you and the committee members for taking your time in hearing what we have to say with regards to such a critical issue that is facing our world. I come to Congo having my first trip been there in 1994 during the Rwandan genocide. And so my history with Congo is dicey at best. But what I have learned through these years is what is most important, and that is organizations just like this, particularly organizations like ECI that go in and take not only a strong look at what's going on, but become active in a community-based level. These NGOs, organizations like this, are most important for what we're doing, but we can't do it alone. We're here today to ask all of you, and I know all of you in this room right now have been to Congo, have taken an active interest in Congo. Please come. But most importantly, we're depending on your voice to spread the word. We're going to lose a generation of women and children in Congo unless we do something now. I'm only a humanitarian relief worker. That's the only thing I've ever done. It's the only thing I know with regards to this region. But I also know what's right, and we can't leave behind these women and children. So we rely on you, and we talk to you today with great hope that you will lead this charge and not forget about these wonderful human beings in a rich culture that has so much to offer to this world. I leave it to the experts to tell you today what is most important, but I would hope that you would ask those people who are on the ground to not only to help you, but for you to let them know that you are behind them, and most importantly, to let the women and children know that they are not forgotten. I particularly want to thank Ben Affleck for allowing me to be a part of this today and for allowing me to be a part of ECI. We are strange political bedfellows. We're the odd couple, perhaps, in politics. But that's the beauty of this, because this transcends political parties. So thank you so much for what you are doing. Most importantly, thank you for listening to what they have to say, and thank you on behalf of many, many NGO aid workers that are on the ground that need your help. Thank you.
McCain, the thank goes to you and to the three other distinguished witnesses for leading so well and by pouring yourself into these humanitarian efforts. I'd like to ask Mr. Affleck, I know that you have been to and have been, ECI actually aids Heal Africa. Could you just provide some additional insights into the work of Heal Africa and other like-minded NGOs and hospitals that you've supported?
Sure, sure. I mean, unfortunately, there aren't very many hospitals in that part of the country. And then we were initially attracted to them because, of course, they're Congolese-run and based, and that's the kind of organizations that we want to be supporting. Sometimes we support grassroots organizations that don't have that level of infrastructure and high-level education. But these people are a Congolese-run hospital that started out very small, primarily, of course, doing fistula repair because the need for fistulas was so urgent there. And they've grown. They've grown because of their skill, their talent, what they're providing, and who's doing the work. And it's one of the few that actually has attracted a decent amount of attention from people. And they provide just top level. I mean, obviously, there's emergency care. I visited them and met, soldiers, who were recovering from gunshot wounds. One guy showed me that he had his wallet in his pocket, and he had been in the war, and he took the wallet out, and the bullet had gone into his pocket and hit the wallet and saved his life. And, he'd had some other ones that he was being treated for, but it was definitely, they were on the front lines of the war, and they're on the front lines of building the peace. And, I don't know what people would do without this kind of hospital there. And they are receiving more. We're working with them, and others are as well. And, they're really pretty exceptional. The other, of course, really well-known hospital is the Panzi Hospital that Dr. Mukwege works at, which is in Bukavu in South Kivu. And he also is just doing exceptional work. I mean, he's the guy who was himself personally early on doing 10 fistula surgeries a day at the height of this epidemic. And it still goes on, but he doesn't have to do all the surgeries. Then they started training other doctors and became sustainable. Those two organizations are spectacular. There are many others that we're working with. Part of what we try to do at ECI is to recalibrate people's perception about Africa and about who's doing what. People go, we're going to throw money down there. It's money down a rat hole. It's not the case at all. Really, in our experience, people who are doing it, solving these problems, maybe it was Congressman Payne who was talking about this earlier, it's Congolese solving Congolese problems, and that's what's was so inspiring to me. And both of those hospitals are really emblematic of that, and I have a bunch of other stories, but I'll spare you.
In your testimony, and Mr. Pendergast also makes a very strong appeal for the special envoy. And Mr. Pendergast, you actually point out that Harold Wolpe, who used to be chairman of this subcommittee years back, actually had his capability diminished, his resources cut, and influence at a time when, of course, he has been ill recently, but even when he had the position. It seems to me that the message we need to send to the White House, because they need to do this, like I said before, yesterday, is to name that special envoy and properly resource that individual. If you both, and perhaps any of you who would like to speak to that issue, because it seems to me that if we don't have a point person who can, in a rapid way, with the ear of the President and the Secretary of State, a phone call away, this window of opportunity, as one of you said in your testimony, could quickly evaporate. And if we, I was, and Mr. Payne and I were talking about this in between testimonies, $5 million expended so far. Last time it was about $80 million. And when the administration testifies that there's a $350 million gap, that may doom this election unless quick corrective action is taken, and the special envoy would have that ability to say, we're going to make this happen. So if you could speak to that.
I'll just give a quick answer, then John can get into the nuanced policy detail stuff. But, there's a lot going on. We've heard other people talking about what the U.S. government is doing, what other folks are doing. A big part of this is about synthesizing all this stuff, taking all these strands, as many of you know who work in the private sector. You can have a lot of people doing stuff and maybe doing their jobs well, but if they're not working together and they don't know what the other hand is doing, frankly, you just have a lot of waste. So we've got resources dedicated that are now being frittered away because they're not working collectively and they're not working cohesively. Somebody's supposed to be doing elections, somebody's supposed to be doing gender-based violence, somebody's supposed to, there are people designated to liaise with regional governments like Burundi and Rwanda and Uganda and others, but without somebody sort of taking the lead and being able to do that kind of shuttle diplomacy where they move across those folks, it just really isn't going to be successful. In fact, we're underutilizing what we're already deploying, in effect. And I've talked about the stakes a little bit, and I'll let John take it.
Just a footnote what Ben's saying there is when I worked at the White House and the State Department, I just found it to be endlessly frustrating because so many issues in countries were stovepiped and kept in their categories. And what a special envoy, and you got, in Central Africa, you've got cross-border issues, you've got multiple issues that bring equities in from all kinds of different departments throughout the U.S. government. So you need someone to be able to break through this stovepiping, and it can't be a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State who just gets dual-hatted to be doing something else besides their regular job, which is 20 hours a day anyways, with the beeper going off every 30 minutes in the other 4 hours. You just got to have someone whose full-time job is focused, and it's someone with influence, someone that can pick up the phone and say, Secretary Clinton, it's actually time for you to say or do something now, and someone who can actually move the system, move the needle away from the inertia that just pervades government. This is just where it is. People are well-meaning, but the system it's systemically tilted towards the status quo. To be able to move that needle away from the status quo towards action, that's what you need a special envoy for. And we should collectively, civil society and the legislative branch, press the executive branch to do this as soon as possible. We know President Obama moved on the special envoy in Sudan because of George Clooney. Maybe he'll move it in Congo because of Ben.
Well, I think I don't think it would have much to do with me, but from what I've heard, and we spent a lot of time asking people around this town, I know that if we had the support of Ambassador Yamamoto and Assistant Secretary Carson, we'd go a long way. So I want to urge Yamamoto's still here, and Carson, wherever you are, help us out. This can be a collective effort, and I know we can get there.
Thank you, and I couldn't agree more. Ms. Vigo-Walsh, in your testimony, you referenced the CRS project that aims to prevent sexual violence against women by sensitizing communities and mobilizing local leaders, and it's done through training transitional justice leaders, military and police officials, who then become community sensitization leaders. Could you tell us how successful that program has been? And secondly, and Ms. McCain, you might want to speak this to, as well, the issue of microcredit financing is huge in Africa, and dollar for dollar, I can't think of a better way of helping to empower women, especially because most of those grants or loans, I should say, go to women. And with a small amount of money, someone can not only get gainfully employed, but they end up hiring 4, 5, 6 people in many cases. For those women who have been so sexually abused and traumatized, do you find that microcredit financing and job skills helps them to mend, not only help provide for themselves and perhaps their families, but also is part of the healing process?
Thank you, Chairman. With regards to our project, where with the Catholic Church, we train transitional justice leaders. The program is critical and it's very effective because we have to step back for a moment and look at the context. We're talking about a country where there is no rule of law. The justice system is in shambles. So there is nothing but traditional leadership in justice. So the fact of the matter is we're working in communities where the view of justice still is embedded in cultural ideas that are attached to the stigma, how to overcome the stigma or how to reduce stigma. And what I mean by that is a girl that is perhaps as young as 14 years old, in order to avoid that stigma, she is forced to marry her rapist. And that is the traditional justice system. So we've been working with hundreds and hundreds of justice leaders, traditional justice leaders, in order to work with them on making their policies, shall we say, more gender sensitive and more sensitive to the needs and protection of the women and girls. That's on the first point. And with regards to the microcredit financing, absolutely, absolutely critical. And I'm glad that you noted that it is part of the healing process, in fact. through our savings and lending schemes, we've had rape survivors that had been ostracized from their communities and therefore lost their breadwinners once their husbands abandoned them. And one particular case that I'm thinking of right now, she was actually able to save the equivalent of $600 US to build her own house. This is a woman who would have been living in the street, quite literally, after having been ostracized by her community. Once those kinds of programs work so much on the self-esteem, and the self-esteem after rape is so critical to being able to move on and to be able to remake one's life, even in the face of having been ostracized by the community. So these programs are critical, and I strongly suggest that they continue to be supported, and I do thank the U.S. government for all the support that we have received for these programs thus far. Thank you.
Ms. McCain, did you want to come?
The only thing I would add to that, you're exactly right. Microfinancing is, in my opinion, key to this. So are free and fair elections. And unless we can do both, we are never going to have a society of women that will have any kind of rights at all. So that would be the only thing I would add to that.
Thank you. Mr. Payne.
Well, let me certainly thank all of you for your testimony, and I think that the interest of all of you in this issue really assists us in Congress to try to highlight the problems without people like you, Ms. McCain, and Mr. Affleck, and of course Pendergrass is the agitator behind all of this stuff, and of course the work that Catholic Relief Services does. We would probably have a difficult time filling the room, probably only have a third of it covered. So I think that people don't realize the importance of people in your categories, that you can bring attention to issues. And I think it's important, once we get the attention, we know what to do, you know, Congressman Smith and myself and the other members of Congress, but you do help us highlight the problems. And I really, once again, thank you all for your interest in these issues. It seems and it's very clear that we definitely need to have a special envoy. I recall, maybe John, you remember when we went with President Clinton to Africa, and during our time there, we just simply had a meeting of the Great Lakes region presidents. I mean, because so much is interrelated. You know, Uganda was arguing a little bit with Burundi. You had Rwanda looking over at what was happening in Zimbabwe. I mean, it's so interrelated that a special envoy not only should deal with the problems of the Congo, but to be able to coordinate. As a matter of fact, Uganda was the recipient of a terrorist attack because Uganda was assisting in Somalia with their troops to protect the government of Sheikh Sharif Sheikh Ahmed and the transitional federal government. And without Ugandan troops there, the situation would be much worse. Well, that's all connected, that at the World Cup game, Uganda suffered the loss of 20-some of their citizens by al-Shabaab planting a bomb as people were simply watching the World Cup because they were Ugandan troops helping in Somalia. So it's so all connected that it seems that it would certainly make a lot of sense that we do have an envoy, especially to deal with the DRC, but also to have the surrounding countries there involved. And the fact that so many, the tragedy of the Congo, as I mentioned earlier, with King Leopold and how the country was just devastated. And then once they decided to move forward, the conspiracy of the West to come together and have Patrice Lumumba murdered. That was really, and I'm glad, Mr. Affleck, that we can't forget the past. We don't need to dwell on it. But if we know the past, we know why we're in positions we're in. Congo, with the leadership of Lumumba and those who were emerging at that time, could have had a total difference on the way the Congo is today. But by us propping up Mobutu, who raped the country for decades and decades, we find ourselves now struggling again to try to get democracy moving and trying to get this whole question of rape, which should be despised by society, but it's something that people sort of shrug their shoulders and say, well, that happens. So I really, like I said, really commend you for your efforts. I know Mrs. Walsh, or Bigard Walsh, you all work with child soldiers, and I know that perhaps some of the abusers who are involved in rape now were probably child soldiers before. So I wonder what your organization is doing as it relates to child soldiers in the DRC.
To illustrate what we are doing with child soldiers, I could speak of a program we had in North Kivu in partnership with the Caritas Goma and Caritas Rome as well. We were supporting centers through which demobilized children were transported to after being demobilized, providing a trauma healing therapy, working with them to prepare them for reintegration back into society. The problem is that clearly these kinds of services aren't enough. The number of children that were needing DDR services in a few years ago was much, much greater than the level of funding that we had. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Affleck, maybe you and Mr. Pendergrass might be able to deal with the question, what do you see us needing on the ground in order to make these elections work?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to an earlier question that I don't think got answered, which is that the difference between MONUC and MONUSCO is the two letters which stand for stabilization and organization. The idea being that it's got an expanded mandate for, well, stabilization, among other things. And you know, that Mies, who replaced Alan Doss, seems to be doing a fine job. He's an American, and people are optimistic, and there have been some appreciative changes. Now, that entity plays a real role, obviously, in elections. And, you know, as you know, you were there. They played an instrumental part in elections the last time. What I hear from people in this environment is, well, the second election is always harder. It's the one fewer people want to pay attention to. It's the one that can either cement democracy or it can all fall backward and become unwound. We need to have monitors. We need to have, like I say, internationally accredited monitors. We're hoping the Carter Center will up the ante a little bit on what they're willing to do. I think IRI is going to come in. I think NDI will then follow. But we also need a fully committed effort. And frankly, we need, you know, to maintain that peace and stability. You asked about the FDLR and CNDP and, you know, to sort of more fully address that. Where we are right now is that, yes, because of when Nkunda got taken away by the Rwandese, the CNDP folded up into the FARDC. However, they sort of cut a deal with Bosco Ntaganda, so Bosco is now kind of the de facto leader of the CNDP inside the FARDC, which creates a kind of tension, and it's one that has to be managed by MONUSCO because you arrest him, you may create a lot of problems, you may go back to the war that you had before, and it's tricky. When we were there recently, you know, right after we flew out, the airport was the scene of a huge, you know, shooting and chase, and Bosco had brought in gold. They had brought in a bunch of gold that they were smuggling, and there was a big police chase up there. So this is a guy acting with a lot of impunity and creating a lot of instability. And, you know, the Kimana RDF, FRDC efforts to go after the FDLR on the flip side, which I think represented, to get to your question, a further break between the FDLR and the FARDC and Kabila and those guys who really were kind of on his side during the war. But it got stopped a bit because the FDLR was smart, and they knew that enough civilian casualties, they would leave and then come back and kill a lot of civilians, and they knew that would damp down enthusiasm for further military actions. The Rwandese, of course, left. These intractable, thorny issues need to be solved, as well as the other practical electoral stuff vis-a-vis elections. So you have a lot of logistical stuff. They need support. They need people there saying, this is how we should do it. It needs MONUSCO flying people around. It needs MONUSCO fully dedicated. And it also needs increased diplomatic involvement and engagement to help to continue to, and this is a place where the U.S. has done a lot of really good work, you know, guys like Tim Shortley, State Department, who was over there several years ago and working closely with Nkunda and the Goma peace accords and such, you know, that we need to continue to push that towards peace, because any of these guys, the Boscos and so on, that if those situations flare up, it could easily trigger further stability in elections. That wasn't more than you wanted to hear. But.
No, it was very, you're pretty up on this stuff. You know, it's really, you're very impressive. JP?
The only thing I would add there, and that was indeed a great answer. You are pretty.
Thank you. Thank you. Him I paid to say that.
But I would add, it just actually highlight the diplomatic effort that you just spoke of as part and parcel of the larger thing, and put a little meat on those bones and say, what you need, of course, as we do in other countries that matter to the United States, is you create these unified coordination mechanisms. Call them donor coordination, call them diplomatic coordinators. They then craft multilateral carrots and sticks related to electoral benchmarks. And you deploy them early enough that they can actually influence the process as it unfolds, because, of course, anyone who wants to steal an election is watching to see what the world will do. And if the world does nothing but put out a little press release saying, bad, you know, slap on the wrist, of course they're going to go ahead because of the reasons we've talked about for so long. The money, the gravy train will be lost if you lose the election. So we need that multilateral, unified voice of the governments that have influence to develop the carrots and sticks, create the watchdog actions that will blow whistles when there are problems, and do it early enough. Create this thing early enough so you're not just waiting until the day of the vote to say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. But we can actually watch and see how it unfolds. We'll know months in advance whether this is going to be a credible election. And if the answer is no, then we can deploy and say, wait a minute, we're not going to support this. You're going to have to change it for anyone to take this seriously. And then it's up to the Congolese government to develop their own calculation about whether or not they want to reform it. So I think that's what that's one of the elements of many, as Ben said, that we need to be engaged in to try to make a difference here.
Thank you. I guess my time is just about expired. I won't ask you, Ms. McCain, about elections. I will just want to say that elections are so important. I just want to remind the Chairman that we have the problem in Cote d'Ivoire where the President lost the election and just decided, I'm not going to leave. I mean, this is unbelievable, with everyone saying AU, ECOWAS, IGAD, EU, US, saying you lost, you should step out. And so I think that we really have to keep the pressure on Gbagbo to step down, and if we could move that legislation forward to have the Congress on record with the rest of the world saying get out, because if he stays in, it's going to be a bad example for all of these other elections. There are about a dozen elections coming up in Africa this year. And if this is the principle where you lose and you stay and you say, well, I'm not leaving, then we're going to be in a world of trouble in these elections coming up, including the Congo. So once again, thank you all for your testimony.
Thank you, Don. Mr. Fort Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for you, Mr. Affleck and Mrs. McCain. I'm curious, how did you choose the Eastern Congo as a focus of your passion and interest? The reason I say that is those of us who sit on this committee and others where global human rights is a concern and of deep interest and essential. The insults to humanity, the effrontery that comes across our desks daily in so many places throughout the world can almost just be exhausting. So I'm curious, how did you choose this particular area?
I came to it, I won't go into my own personal journey because that may be inappropriate for this, but I think really for me frankly, was reading. I was looking at some other stuff, trying to cast around, looking at advocacy, and I came across this, well, of course, it pales into comparison with the millions of deaths in Eastern Congo, and I was on the one hand shocked, and on the other hand really ashamed. How could I not have known this? You know, I read the newspaper, and yet I had no idea, and so I thought, well, maybe this is a place where I can at least, you know, show up. I don't know what. And I started studying, and I started learning. I took a couple of years. I didn't want to be a, you know, kind of a celebrity dilettante sort of person that doesn't know what they're talking about and irritates everyone, because I thought that wouldn't help any.
Well, that's very impolitic of you to say, but very well received, I should say, as well.
So I really did a lot of studying. Whitney Williams, who's here, was instrumental in helping me do that, and met with a lot of really learned experts, John among them, and when I foremost among them, and when I ultimately got to a place where I want to build an organization, because I kind of identified that the best people I thought were doing the best work with people who had some skin in the game, who were living in the community every day, who knew people, who knew the militia, who knew who the children were. I talked to people who were taking kids out of child soldiers out of the militias, and they would go to them and address them, you know, kind of personally and bargain. Look, at least you don't need him. Well, give me her. And then, you know, while that was happening, they had already found a place for the child to live in the village rather than an institutional home or the like. And I thought, gosh, this is what happens when something bad happens in your community and you're dealing with it because you know the people. And I got struck that I wanted to help empower those folks because, of course, they had no money. And so we started raising money. And I also thought, you know, nothing changes without advocacy, without powerful people making up their minds, people like you. And the idea to ultimately sit here and address you, it's a real thrill for me. And then I want to surround myself with kind of smart, thoughtful philanthropists and you know, people who got it. And everybody who knows something about this knows how long Mrs. McCain has been involved in this. As she said, since she's in Goma in '94. That's a big deal. And since then, doing a lot of work. And so I gave her a call and hope she wouldn't think it was a prank call.
Well, clearly your investment of time and passion is very genuine, and I think it's going to give continuity to this effort, and I'm grateful. Ms. McCain, did you have to add anything? Or?
Other than to say everything is always a personal journey, and this my story is no different. I won't go into it, but what I will say is that from my own personal well-being, Africa has haunted me in a good way. It has kept me coming back because I see such hope there. I see such possibilities, and I know that with the help of people like Mr. Affleck and others around the world that we can make a difference. And so it's nothing more than a personal journey for me as well, but it's one that has kept me coming back. And I love it there, and I would rather not be anyplace else.
Thank you as well for your time and passion on it. I did want to raise a couple of quick issues in the limited time I have left. Mr. Prendergast, you had made a correlation between the pervasiveness of a culture of rape and the conflict regarding minerals. It's unclear to me what that direct correlation is. If you could spend 20 seconds unpacking that, please.
Actually, it says 40 here. I mean, anyways.
I have another question, though.
Well, that should have been we didn't need a laugh line right before talking about this because it is so crushingly serious. You know, what basically our assessment is that these militia armed groups on the ground, including the government army, we always talk about rebels, there's militias both from Rwanda and Congo and the government army. They've used the tactic of rape as a weapon. See,
I don't think this point is very clear, and I appreciate you saying there's a correlation there, but go ahead.
And to use rape as a tactic of war in order to intimidate local communities to go along with the kind of mafia economy that we're talking about all day today. So, I mean, in Sierra Leone, they used amputations to terrorize civilian populations. People use what works. And if there is no consequence, if impunity reigns, then why not this? And so there are many other factors involved. I think you're wanting to say something in there. Can I yield some of my time?
Yes, please.
Just to clarify that also a bit more, It's a displacement mechanism. It moves people out of the areas where these resources are so they can move in and take control of the mines. And if you look
So
at
this is not just some act of depravity that happens in ungoverned spaces. It's deliberate, it's intentional for larger geopolitical purposes.
It is a strategy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a strategy.
This is a point.
It's both. It's all of those things.
Okay.
You know what I mean? What happens is these tactics create an environment where it seems like anything goes. You know, but I do absolutely concur. At least what I've seen from these two folks is that it's about armed groups saying we're going to go after this area and this is how we're going to attack them. And then it becomes just, you know, a kind of horrible reality where it's acceptable.
I called it a culture of rape. I don't know if that's it's the right description.
I don't think it is exactly, because the vast majority of Congolese are absolutely devastated by what's happened to their country.
And that's why it becomes a powerful weapon.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ms. Bass?
So thank you for your last comment about that. But let me just start by thanking all of you for the work that you do, and in particular, Mr. Affleck, for using your celebrity in this manner, because it's extremely powerful, and it is, as the chairman and ranking member said, one of the reasons this issue has received so much attention, and the same to you, Ms. McCain. I wanted to reference some comments that Mr. Prendergast, when you described the deadly mineral trade and the mafia economy, I think you described it very well, but I wanted to know, in your opinion, what about the political leadership? Is it there? I mean, there's an election that's getting ready to happen in November. Is there legitimate? We talked about the elections being legitimate. You know, maybe they will be, maybe they won't. But my question is there legitimate political leadership to be elected?
Well, just in 30 seconds, you know, we have this country which for 125, 150 years has been just pillaged by the international community for going back to the turn of the last century, ivory and rubber to help our jewelry industry and our auto industry. Then uranium from the Congo was critical in our atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And now cell phones, laptops, and all the other things that we use every day are fueled. And what happens is you create a system where a political system that basically is designed to maximize private gain and crater the public sector, because the public sector, the rule of law, would undermine this. So you have internal collaborators with this international system, but it's a system that benefits us. We got cheap phones. We got cheap computers. We had nuclear weapons that worked. We had piano keys and all the rest of it at the turn of the century with the ivory that was built. So, in other words, this is going on for so long. It's hard to say suddenly, you know, oh, we're going to turn this around with one election. It's a system in which the termites have absolutely devastated the political foundation of the country, and that has, until you address that economic foundation, I don't think it's just changing chairs on the Titanic. On the deck of the Titanic with these electoral processes. Terribly important to invest in, but you got to do both the political and economic at the same time to make a difference.
I wanted to ask another question too. This is about AFRICOM. The question is, the United States African Command, or AFRICOM, has been engaging in pilot training of 1 battalion focusing on human rights and unit cohesion conditions, and AFRICOM is controversial. So my question is, should the U.S. expand on this project to address other security needs? And then I guess just in reference to what you were saying before, you know, I remember 20, 30 years ago when there were liberation movements in the various countries, and we can talk about how all those turned out, but there were independence and liberation movements, and so I don't think you have described one in the Congo.
Do you want to also say something, Ben, on this? Jump in if you want. No, I'm saying if you want to say anything after I'm done, because I think I have something to say about this. The military reform issue, I think, I mean, I think ECI, if you look at their recommendations, if you look at what the Enough Project and others that have worked on this stuff, the military reform, security sector reform is at the top of anyone's list of what we need to invest in. Now, you go to Congo and you spend time with the Congolese leadership, and what militaries do they respect? You know, it's not a surprise, the United States military. So when the U.S. comes in and says, we're going to train a battalion in Kisangani, this makes a difference to them. People are bumping each other out of line to sign up to be part of this. So the United States has influence. It has leverage on this one. And here's one where if we work more aggressively together, and this is why you need a special envoy, because we don't have enough diplomatic firepower with the existing system to be able to do this kind of full-time work, is to get the donors together that actually do military training, like China, like South Africa, like Angola, the countries that actually have influence with the Congolese government. We work together with them about a systemic reform of the military, and then AFRICOM becomes a major player in all of that. And specifically, I want to highlight one element of the larger security sector reform, and that's military justice. Again, we have a comparative advantage there. They respect us on this front. You've got to get at this impunity issue. Getting at the impunity issue within the military, even as much or maybe more important than within the broader society, you start to see convictions for rapes and for other kinds of crimes in Congo of military officers or soldiers who are involved in this kind of stuff. Then that sends a signal. So these are the building blocks to a state. And I think that AFRICOM, for all the controversy on other fronts, can play a major important role in the Congo in helping to build that particular block of the larger foundation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the relevance of AFRICOM there has to do with, look, MONUSCO does all of the training now, the FIRDC. They work together, they train guys. They are having difficulties. We are better at it than they are. I met some of our guys down there doing this work. Obviously, they're great guys. They're U.S. military. They really know what they're doing, men and women. They're doing just training very few units. That's good. It needs to happen. And I hate to have all these answers come with caveats, because then I don't want it to feel like, well, but you got to do everything. But really, that has to be accompanied by some reform in the units that they go back to. Particularly, a huge, huge problem is that soldiers just don't get paid. A legacy from the Mobutu area was you kind of went and lived off the people. Mobutu, had destroyed all the infrastructure and eaten up all the money, and so he sent his army around. It was like, well, you want to get paid, take what you can take. You got a gun. And there's a little bit of that left. People, not a little bit, a lot, unfortunately. I've visited FARDC battalion camps. They're like tent cities. They're a little better than the refugee camps. In fact, they often go and loot and pillage from those refugee camps. FARDC soldiers are responsible for 40%, some say, of the rapes in the country. This is where you have a military that's deployed among the population that's feeding off of the population. It's unimaginable to us. Our militaries go elsewhere and secure our freedoms. This is a horrible inversion of that. So, I mean, the Eastern Congo would be better off, I think, if you just took the divisions out of there. That's not practical politically, but what is practical is to go around and just train troops on one side. I would love for us to take over a little bit more or do some training of the MONUSCO guys, but on the other side, get people paid. If you only make $40 a month being a soldier in the FARDC, but at least it's enough to buy what you need, where you're not compelled to, go out. I mean, they walk. Their station in Kisangani, it's 800 miles to go somewhere. They walk that far. It's like, ancient Rome.
Mr. McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like you to respond to the need for PEPFAR money being included for the Congo in the treatment, particularly in terms of maternal infant transmission of AIDS, and the fact that PEPFAR does not affect the Congo. That's one thing I'd like. And the second thing is, I think you get a little more humble as you go along in this business, and you realize that passing a bill isn't everything that it's cut out to be. You can have the champagne and have a good time and clap your hands and be happy. It really is writing the rules and regulation where it really happens. And that's going on right now. And I would like you, John, to talk about what the committee can do, because you put this up as an action item. What the committee should be looking for in the writing those rules and regulations as to whether they are good rules and regulations or whether they're slippery. I've been doing this long enough to know that you can't hardly write a law that somebody can't figure out a way to get around. So what I'm really looking for is the best set of rules and regulations that we can have to make this law work, and what things we as a committee should be looking at, or we as a Congress should be looking at.
Congressman McDermott, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question as I don't work in AIDS relief, and I'm not familiar with that kind of programming.
I don't know the specific answer on PEPFAR, so
Okay.
but I think between us, between our staffs, we can get back because I think it's.
I know it's a problem at Heal Africa in Goma because I know where they're getting their drugs. They're not getting.
You're right. They are short on drugs at Heal Africa, and they, in fact, particularly, what was the program? It was like a youth. Right. Anyway, there are shortages.
I was
they
asking
need to be addressed. PEPFAR is a great program, and obviously implementation is good, and making sure that people get access to those drugs is important. And we can furnish the committee with details of that when we put them together.
I was asking a softball so you could let the committee know. But go ahead. The more tough question is the regulations.
I think that the top two, I would say, for the SEC regulations, and they're getting bombarded right now because the industry, lost that battle on the Hill, and they're mad, and they're coming back with lots of lobbyists to try to press the SEC to water this thing down. Like you said, so keep the cork in the champagne. We're not done yet. You're absolutely right. Number one, I think that there be stiff fines for companies that do not comply with the intent of the law, do not open up the books to demonstrate that their supply chains indeed are free of conflict. And if they're not, they're at least acknowledging, yep, we got it from there, and yes, we know where it came from, and now consumers, you can make your choices. But if you try to hide it, you try to circumvent it, try to subvert it, then let's see some serious fines. Secondly, I think then is the question of when this all should come into effect. And I think one of the big things that you're seeing lobbyists push for now is a significant delay in implementation. We haven't yet seen the State Department make its own recommendations in this regard, but I talked to a senior member of the administration last night who said that they were going to not advocate for a delay. I hope that his opinion is actually ends up being the U.S. government's opinion. But right now, the SEC is hearing from a lot of industry sources that they simply can't comply with all this. Although other companies, particularly within the electronics industry, they've been working on this now for a couple of years, partly as a response to the legislation, but partly also because some of them want to do the right thing. And they've shown very clearly that they can do what is required to do with respect to the law. Illustratively, Apple, a year and a half ago, Apple was not much of a contributor to the Electronics Industry Association and its efforts to try to clean up the supply chain. They basically, their argument, if you'd talked to them about it, was, look, we have no idea where this stuff is coming from. How can we possibly be expected to know? It's, it's a war down there, and where it comes from is not really something we can control. Well, a week ago, now we've had the legislation, we've had Mr. Jobs actually get personally engaged, and his wife, of course, with ECI. And now, a week ago, Apple put out its whatever report that it does, and it was the most robust reporting of any company on where their materials are coming from, right down to the smelters, to the processors. And I mean, this is something, again, the lobbyists said a year ago, even that were working for Apple, said it was impossible. So, basically, I think this is what the legislation is going to be able to do. It's going to urge people to actually do the right thing when they've said for quite a long time they can't. They actually can. So the question is, how fast are they going to have to do it? And instead of, a delay of a year or 2 years or whatever some of these guys are asking for, we'd like to see the timely implementation of the regulations and to come into force very quickly after the SEC makes its rulings.
Keep on making the publicity to keep it up above the radar. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to add one note, Catholic Relief Services and the USCCB did write the SEC to ask for the absolute most strongest rules possible, and we hope for the timely implementation as well. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Mr. Payne, you have any final?
Just want to say that we do have to really make sure that they don't change. When it was interesting years ago, I was able to encourage Congressman Tancredo, who was working with me on Sudan, to get a bill passed in the House that capital market sanctions were put in. In other words, if you were doing business in Sudan, you had to come out of Wall Street. And we passed it in the House. but that's where it ended. What, a lobbyist ran over to the Senate, even had the head of every top board, and Mr. Tancredo, who was great on Sudan. We didn't have champagne when it passed, but we were very happy, and it simply died by virtue of the lobbyists saying you can't do that. So hopefully we will be able to push this through. I just have a comments from the International Crisis Group that would like to add their statement for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just conclude by, again, thanking you. I would like to ask, if maybe Mr. Prendergast, you might want to speak to this. The administration's LRA strategy, how well or poorly do you think it's being implemented? What is it from your perspective? Anyone else who would want to touch on it as well?
Thanks for bringing that up. I should have, at least in my testimony. I think it's such a crucial element of overall security and stability in Central Africa. We've battled internally within our organizations and the groups that care about the LRA. We were putting out this report card, and I was trying to give the administration D's and F's, you know, and everybody was like, no, they'll just demoralize everyone, because I feel like there is one major thing that has to be done. I mean, the elephant is swinging its tail around the living room, is that you have to create a focused military strategy to apprehend or whatever the leadership of the Lord's Resistance Army. As long as Joseph Kony continues to run around, we've presented him with a very, very fair peace deal, peace proposal, which he didn't even bother to show up to not sign. And so there's a military option that needs to be exercised. What has happened now over the last 3 years is a broader counterinsurgency strategy where millions and millions of dollars and thousands of Ugandan troops are running around Central Africa attacking LRA units, and often those are formerly or conscripted child soldiers. I don't think that kind of a broad counterinsurgency strategy has any chance of working. We need to target the leadership, use our technical assets that are superior to anyone's in the world, ensure that they're out there. We robustly support a commando unit to be able to close and act on a hot lead and take these guys out. Hopefully we'll apprehend them and send them to Hague, and there'll be a great trial, and the ICC will have a major success. If not, let's do what we have to do to bring an end to tragedy, because the attacks in the Congo are getting worse. In northeastern Congo, and these are, you know, remote areas no one knows. Every once in a while a report trickles in and it makes a little column in a local newspaper here in the United States. We're not even looking at this anymore. So we have to refocus and say, what is the thing that's going to end it? That's the catalyst, I think, that will end it.
I think he makes a really good point. I think, you know, absolutely, I've seen the evidence of this stuff and people who are after it. There are really good people involved in trying to pursue some of the goals that John's talking about. And you do hear, you know, every month or two, oh, well, 400 people got killed and such and such. And oftentimes it'll take 2-3 days or a week to even come through. I think it's equally important to maintain a focus on the FDLR in Eastern Congo. The FDLR really are the people that, well, at least still their leadership now, committed the genocide in Rwanda, fled to what was then Zaire, injected this sort of sociopath, toxic poison into it. It wasn't like people weren't, you know, raping one another in Zaire. You know, that's where everyone in Rwanda was going to, like, party and dance, when Rwanda was the uptight country in the early 90s. And what happened was that these people who got pushed into that place, who had committed these barbaric crimes, then sort of allowed that to be, it got contagious, and they further ruptured the social fabric. Subsequent 2 wars completely obliterated any infrastructure. These guys are still there, and they're still killing civilians all the time. They're a big part of who's committing the rapes, and they're the ones that we need to stay at. We need to support MONUSCO's effort to do that, despite some pushback. And I think it's important to remember there's the CNDP, and obviously they've committed a lot of crimes. They are now part of the army that presents, you know, Congo has very openly said, you know, peace first, justice second, and, you know, they're in a tough spot with that kind of thing. But the FDLR, there's no question about, because they're not getting folded into the army, and some of them are going to fight to the death. And that part of the country will not be safe until that militia is dealt with, as well as the LRA, who's ferrying, you know, from Uganda to CAR and stuff. Thank you.
And one final statement or question. there's no doubt that Senator Danforth, had he not initiated the work with regards to the comprehensive peace agreement in the Congo, there probably would not have been a comprehensive peace agreement. In Sudan. And in like manner, in Northern Ireland, had it not been for Senator Mitchell, it is unlikely that a peace agreement would have been hammered out there between two disparate parties that were at each other's throats for decades. One last appeal. When Ambassador Yamamoto said he will take it under advisement with regards to the special rep or special envoy, I didn't get a very strong sense of affirmation there. If you could, all of you, if you'd like, make one final appeal to the administration, because time is running. And the fear is that if we don't have someone who can really cobble together all the disparate elements here and really push hard, this may be opportunity lost.
Yes, I just would like to reemphasize that it's the key thing if we're going to see success in the DRC, and it's vital. And finally, I certainly would like to commend you, Ms. McCain, for, you know, when you said you've been involved since 1994, to continue to be way ahead of the curve. I really commend you for that and for your continued interest. Thank you.
If you could.
Yeah, thank you very much. On the special advisor, I haven't heard any good arguments against it. We've been banging on it, talking about it, and going everywhere and asking about it, and no one can tell me why it's a bad idea. It's one appointment in the federal government that could save potentially, who knows, 100,000 lives, 500,000 lives, a lot. It will make a difference, a big difference, if it helps prevent another outbreak of violence and destruction. I don't know Washington. I'm not an expert. What I hear is that it's a tough place because you've got turf battles and bureaucracy, and fortunately that's your business, not mine. But I'm really pleased to be encouraged by you and to be empowered by you to continue to advocate for this, because I too think it's really important. And I know that Ambassador Yamamoto, were he to give us his full-throated support, and Assistant Secretary Carson it would give us his support, it would really help us to go to the Secretary, even on, if necessary, to President Obama. Thank you again.
You know, Mr. Smith, you might ask, you've been asking probably why we should have it. Maybe you should just turn the question around and ask them why not, and see if they can come up with an answer.
Yes.
Chairman, you started off speaking about the elections, and I think that my final appeal would regard increasing women's political participation. As I said before, we're at a critical juncture, and we're not seeing women represented. In fact, not only are they being sidelined, but they're being cast out of the process. And to give you an example, after enduring sustained pressure by their male counterparts, 3 female mayors in South Kivu, the equivalent of mayors, but actually of a grouping of cities, quite a high position, in fact, administrative position, were forced out of office. The Bishop of Bukavu had even gone to them and tried to encourage them to carry out their political mandate and represent women and girls' needs. And finally, in November, they were fired. It's unacceptable. And if women do not represent themselves and their needs, their health, their education needs, then who will? We're not seeing others in the DRC represent their needs. So that would be my final appeal. Thank you.
I think we need to understand that the system is like, we've got this. We've got this under control. The system doesn't like aberrations. They don't like these things like special envoys and other kind of exceptions to the rule. That's just the way institutions work, and the State Department is no different than any other institution. My understanding is, and this is what I fear, and this is what I think, and I'm glad we got our last chance to say this because I want to impart this to you, is my fear is that they're going to give this position, they're going to create the title of it and then give it to a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. They're going to dual hat a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and say, yes, that's going to be our point person, our lead person. Again, no human being has enough time to be a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State of any regional bureau in the U.S. State Department and be a special envoy to one of the most complicated countries in the world, definitely the most complicated I've ever been in 25 years of working in Africa. So that would be a tragic mistake. And secondly, I think that position needs juice. Sorry to use a Hollywood term. You need influence. You need gravitas. You need somebody who can make the system respond to different ideas, new ideas, to doing things in a way that are actually going to get results and bring an end to something rather than manage symptoms. And that person needs to respond. Person needs to report to the Secretary of State. As opposed to being just only in a regional bureau. I think these are the keys to success, and if we don't have them, it's just going to be yet another little spoke in a wheel of failure.
Thank you. Ms. McCain.
Lastly, I would just like to thank all of you again for paying attention to this issue, for listening to us, for allowing us to tell you our thoughts and where we think the most important parts lie, and most importantly, in championing this issue from here, because we'll be following you and we're going to watch. And we really encourage you to continue in such a wholehearted way. As a mother, and the only thing I can say is that as a mother, doing nothing is unacceptable there. So thank you.
Thank you. And the last word goes to Ms. McCain. Thank you so very much. Truly inspiring panel, truly inspiring individuals. The hearing is adjourned.